Welcome back to another story on Harry Reality Bender. This time, we're bringing you, what if Harry discovered Merlin's hidden vault at age 5 and mastered primal magic that terrified the Ministry. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The door in the roots. The willow tree at the back of Mrs. Fig's garden had always been too big. Harry had noticed that about it the first time Petunia dumped him at Mrs. Fig's house. He was 3 then, small enough that the tree looked like something from a story, its roots humping out of the earth like the knuckles of a buried giant. Mrs. Fig never went near it. She'd wave vaguely at the garden when she let Harry outside and say, "Don't touch the roses," and "Stay away from the cats when they're eating," but she never once said anything about the willow. It stood at the far end, past the overgrown patch where the garden stopped pretending to be maintained, branches hanging so low they swept the ground and made a kind of room underneath. Harry liked rooms he could hide in. He was 5 when he actually went inside the curtain of branches. It was a Tuesday in July. He remembered that precisely because Tuesdays were the days Dudley had swimming lessons, which meant Aunt Petunia was occupied and Uncle Vernon was at work and Mrs. Fig had been called upon to manage Harry for the afternoon, which she did by pointing at the garden and going inside to watch television. He'd been hiding from nothing, that particular Tuesday. There was nobody to hide from. But old habits in 5-year-olds don't require a reason, and so Harry slipped under the hanging branches of the willow tree the same way he slipped into cupboards and under beds and behind the loose panel in the garden shed, automatically, quietly, in the particular boneless way of children who have learned that the best version of themselves is the invisible one. Inside the curtain of branches, it was green and dim and smelled like wet earth and something older than wet earth, something Harry had no word for, though later he would describe it as the smell of before. Before what, he couldn't say. Before everything, maybe. The roots of the tree here were enormous, interlocked, forming arches and chambers in the soil. Light came through the branches in shifting coins. It was, Harry thought with the absolute authority of a 5-year-old, the best place he had ever been. He sat there for almost an hour, doing nothing except existing in the comfortable way that small children can exist when no one is watching them and no one needs them to be anything in particular. He'd found a beetle. He watched it navigate the geography of a root for a while, then let it go. It was while he was watching the beetle disappear into a crack between 2 roots that he noticed the door. Not a real door, not immediately. It looked at first like a shadow, the particular shape 2 gnarled roots made when they crossed at an angle, the darkness beneath them slightly more absolute than shadows had any right to be. But Harry had always been good at noticing things, good at it in the way that children are when their survival has depended on reading rooms and reading faces and understanding, before anyone speaks, what the temperature of a situation is. He noticed that the darkness didn't move the way shadows moved. He noticed that the roots framing it were almost deliberately spaced, like something had encouraged them to grow that way. He noticed, most importantly, that the beetle had walked toward it and then veered sharply sideways, in the instinctive diversion that small creatures make around things that are not for them. Harry crawled toward it. Close up, the shadow resolved into something that made no sense for a 5-year-old's brain to process, and so his brain simply didn't. It just showed him what was there without framing it as impossible, a door, set into the earth between the roots, perhaps 2 feet tall, made of something dark and grainy that was not quite wood and not quite stone, with no handle and no hinges visible, and along its edges a very faint luminescence, the color of light through leaves in early morning. He pressed his hand flat against it. The door swung inward. What was on the other side was not underground. That was the first thing, and the most important thing, and the thing Harry spent the next hour trying to understand before giving up and simply accepting it, because 5-year-olds are actually very good at accepting things if the things are interesting enough. On the other side of a 2-foot door set into the roots of a willow tree in Mrs. Fig's back garden in Little Whinging, Surrey, was a room the size of a cathedral. It was round, and the ceiling was lost in darkness, and the walls were warm stone the color of old honey, and it was lit by something that wasn't fire and wasn't electricity, just light, sourceless and steady, as though the air itself had decided to be slightly luminous. Shelves lined the walls, but they didn't hold books. They held, Harry would spend years finding words for this: impressions. Crystallized moments. Contained experiences. They looked like glass spheres of varying sizes, some the size of marbles, some the size of footballs, all glowing with a dim internal light, and when you stood near them you didn't see things so much as you felt them. History without language. Knowledge without text. In the center of the room stood a tree. It was not the willow tree, though it shared something with it, the same quality of being very, very old, the same sense of deep roots. This tree was bare of leaves, its bark silver white, its branches reaching upward into the dark ceiling like fingers, and standing beneath it, or perhaps being it, the distinction wasn't entirely clear, was the Warden. Harry saw the Warden the way you see something in peripheral vision that disappears when you look directly at it. Not a ghost. Not a person. A presence that had chosen, for the sake of communication, to arrange itself into a roughly human shape, tall, draped in something that moved like cloth but behaved like smoke, with a face that was clear when you weren't focusing on it and blurred when you were. Age and gender were both irrelevant. The voice, when it came, was not a sound so much as an understanding, words that arrived already assembled in Harry's mind, without the intermediate step of passing through his ears. "You found it," the Warden said, and the words carried an emotion that was not quite surprise and not quite relief but something adjacent to both. Harry sat down cross-legged on the floor, because his legs had gone a bit wobbly, and because sitting down seemed like the appropriate response to a room this large existing under a garden in Surrey. He looked up at the Warden with the direct, unfiltered gaze that children level at things before they have learned that staring is rude. "Is this yours?" he asked. "No. It belongs to the one who left it, and to the one who finds it. That is what was decided." "Who left it?" The Warden seemed to consider how to frame this for a 5-year-old. Someone who understood that what he knew was too important to die with him, and too dangerous to give to the wrong person. He waited a very long time for the right one. How long? Over 1,000 years. Harry took this in with the particular equanimity of someone who doesn't yet have enough context to know how unusual 1,000 years is. "That's longer than Mrs. Fig," he said, which wasn't untrue. Something shifted in the Warden's featureless face that was not quite a smile but functioned like one. "Yes. Considerably longer." "What's your name?" "I don't have one. The one who made me didn't name me. He called me the Warden because that is what I do. I keep the vault, and what's in it, and I wait for the one who can use it. And that's me." You put your hand on the door and it opened. No one else has managed that in 1,063 years. So yes. That is you. Harry looked around the room, at the shelves and their glowing impressions, at the silver tree, at the ceiling lost in darkness overhead. He looked back at the Warden. "Can I come back?" he asked. "Tomorrow. You can come back whenever you like. The door will open for you now. Only you." Harry nodded, very seriously. Then he said, "I should go back now. Mrs. Fig will want to know I'm not dead." "Yes," the Warden agreed. "Come back when you're ready. There is no hurry. There are 1,000 years of patience in these walls." Harry went back through the door, back under the willow branches, back into the Tuesday afternoon heat of Surrey. He found Mrs. Fig dozing in front of a nature program. He ate the slightly stale biscuits she put out for him. He did not say anything about the door or the room or the Warden, not because he was keeping a secret, but because he understood, with the animal precision of a child who had learned to read situations, that this was not something that would be understood. He went back the next day. And the day after that. And by August he was spending every available hour in the vault, and by September he had stopped being afraid of the dark. The first thing the Warden taught him was how to breathe. Not how to breathe as in the mechanical fact of it, Harry had managed that on his own for 5 years without assistance. How to breathe as in intentionally. As in, breath is not just air. Breath is the first magic. Everything alive that has ever cast a spell, from the oldest creatures to the newest wizards, begins with breath, and most of them don't know it anymore. They've covered it over with wands and words and gestures and incantations, all of which are, the Warden explained with the gentle patience of something that had been waiting a millennium for someone to explain this to, scaffolding. Scaffolding is useful, the Warden said. It lets you build higher than your own reach. But it is not the building. If you remove the scaffolding, the building should stand. Most wizards, if you remove the wand, they cannot cast at all. The scaffold has become the structure. This is what Merlin feared. Harry was 5.5 and sitting under the silver tree with his legs crossed and his eyes closed, which was where the Warden preferred him when they were doing this kind of lesson, and his lungs were full of air and he was holding it and trying to feel what the Warden meant by magic in the breath and not quite getting it yet, but he was patient. He'd noticed that the vault rewarded patience. Rush, and the impressions in the spheres stayed opaque. Wait, and they opened. He breathed out slowly. Something moved. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't light or fire or wind. It was more like, the particular quality of the air around him shifted, the way it shifts when a summer storm is coming, that electric anticipatory tightening. The silver leaves of the tree above him, which had never moved before, stirred. There, the Warden said, very quietly. Did you feel that? Yes, Harry said. That was yours. Not the trees, not this room's. Yours. Harry opened his eyes and looked at the stirring leaves. They settled slowly. He searched for the word and came up with full, which wasn't quite right, but was closer than anything else he had. Not powerful. Full. Like something that had been empty in him for a long time had just received its first measure. It felt nice, he said. It will feel better. And also, sometimes, it will be frightening. It is very old and very large, and you are young and small. But you will grow into it. They always do, the right ones. Were there others? Before me? The door was made for one person. But the instruction, the pattern of what is here, was built knowing that person would come to it young, and would need time. Merlin was very thorough. Was Merlin frightening? Harry asked. The Warden seemed to genuinely consider this. He was the most powerful sorcerer in the history of these islands. But he was frightening in the way that deep water is frightening, because of what it contains, and because of how little of it you can see. Not because it meant harm. Harry thought about deep water. He'd never actually been swimming, the Dursleys hadn't taken him, and he hadn't been to school swimming lessons yet, and Mrs. Fig's garden had no pool. But he'd seen water on television and understood the concept of depth and what it meant. I don't want to be like a weapon, he said suddenly. The Warden tilted its not-quite head. What made you think of that? Uncle Vernon says I'm dangerous, Harry said, simply, without heat. He says I'm unnatural. I think he's scared of me. And I don't want to be a thing that people are scared of because I'm going to hurt them. Being powerful and being dangerous are not the same thing. A river is powerful. It carves canyons. It carries cities. Whether it is dangerous depends entirely on whether it is in its right place, running in the direction it is meant to go. The Warden paused. You are not dangerous. You are, as yet, undirected. That is what this place is for. Harry lay back on the floor of the vault and stared up at the silver tree's bare branches spreading into the dark ceiling above him. He felt the stone floor, cool and solid, against his shoulder blades. He breathed in. He breathed out. He came back every chance he got. He was 6 when he held fire for the first time. The Warden didn't call it fire, it called it formed intention, which Harry thought was a very unhelpful name for something that was, undeniably, a flame sitting in his palm like a small pet. It was deep amber, almost orange, and it gave off warmth without heat and light without shadow, and it didn't burn him because it was his, the same way a heartbeat doesn't hurt you even though it is technically muscle contracting under pressure. He held it for about 30 seconds before it sputtered out and he sat there breathing hard, not from effort but from something more fundamental, the exhilaration of having done a thing that the world generally agreed wasn't possible for a 6-year-old in a Surrey garden. "I want to do that again," he said immediately. "Tomorrow," the warden said. "Today you eat, you sleep, you tell no one, you come back tomorrow." Harry had discovered, by this point, that the warden was genuinely non-negotiable about pacing. It didn't matter how much Harry wanted to push further, the warden had, as it explained with perfect serenity, seen exactly what happened when primal magic was rushed, and the results were catalogued in the lower levels of the vault in a section Harry was not yet allowed to visit. Harry had learned to trust this judgment without fully understanding it, because the warden had never been wrong about anything small, which suggested it was probably also right about the things that were large. He went home. He ate his dinner, the smaller portion, the slightly burnt piece, the one that had fallen on the floor and been picked up and put on his plate anyway. He went to bed in a cupboard under the stairs. He lay in the dark and breathed the way the warden had taught him, and in the dark there was a faint warmth in his hands that wasn't really there, but also definitely was. He slept better than he had in months. Somewhere around his 7th birthday, Aunt Petunia noticed that Harry had stopped flinching. This disturbed her in a way she couldn't articulate and therefore expressed as irritation. He still did his chores. He still went to his cupboard when told. He still said yes, Aunt Petunia and sorry, Uncle Vernon and all the words that were required of him. But the flinching, the slight backward lean when Vernon raised his voice, the way his shoulders had always curved inward when Petunia pulled him by the arm, that was gone. He stood straight. He looked at people with a directness that she found increasingly unsettling. When Dudley shoved him off the sofa one evening and laughed about it, Harry got up, looked at Dudley with an expression that contained no particular malice and absolutely no fear, and walked away, which was somehow worse than if he'd cried. Vernon had noticed too, and his response was to become louder and more insistent, the way people do when they feel their authority slipping. He shouted more that year. He took away Harry's meals more frequently and assigned more chores, and once, in a moment of genuine alarm at something he couldn't name, grabbed Harry's arm hard enough to leave a bruise and got 3 inches from his face and told him to wipe that look off it, boy, and Harry had looked at him with those steady green eyes and said, quietly, yes, Uncle Vernon, and Vernon had let him go and felt, inexplicably, that he had just lost something. What had changed was not that Harry had decided to stop being afraid. Fear is not something you decide. What had changed was more fundamental: Harry had somewhere to be. He had something that was his. The vault existed, and the warden existed, and the knowledge accumulating in him daily was real and solid and growing, and against all of that, the shouting of a frightened fat man in Privet Drive was simply small. Not nothing. Still unpleasant. Still unfair. But small in the way that a headache is small compared to a mountain. He hadn't stopped loving the idea of being loved by them. He just quietly stopped expecting it. He was 8 when he first read the spheres. The warden had been preparing him for this since the beginning, not telling him but preparing him, the same way the vault's temperature had gradually shifted to accommodate him, the same way the light had brightened incrementally over 3 years as though tuning itself to his presence. When he finally pressed both hands against the first sphere and felt the world inside it unfold, it wasn't a shock. It was more like a door opening that you had heard footsteps approaching for a long time. What was in the spheres was not academic knowledge. It was not spells with names and Latin roots and wand movements. It was experience, compressed and preserved like fruit in amber, the accumulated magical understanding of someone who had lived so long and felt so deeply and practiced so obsessively that the boundary between himself and the magic had eventually dissolved. Harry understood, reading the spheres, what it felt like to call lightning from a clear sky. He understood the particular patience required to speak to water and have it listen. He understood the fundamental difference between a curse, which is intention weaponized, and a blessing, which is intention given freely, and why primal magic made no distinction between the two but simply amplified whatever the caster's deepest truth was. He also understood, very clearly, that Merlin had been afraid. Not of a person, not of anything you could fight. Merlin had been afraid of forgetting. He'd been afraid that the world was already, in his own lifetime, beginning to move away from the living root of magic towards something cleaner and more controlled and more reproducible but fundamentally less real, and that within a few centuries the old ways would be gone and nobody would remember what had been lost, not even enough to miss it. He'd built the vault and the Warden and sealed it all under a willow tree in what would eventually become England, and he'd gone to whatever ending he'd gone to, and he trusted that someone would find it. Harry sat with that for a long time after the sphere went dark in his hands. He sat under the silver tree and he held the weight of a dead man's trust, and he thought about what it meant to carry something that old. He didn't know who I'd be, Harry said. No. He narrowed the conditions considerably. The door required magic of a particular resonance, and certain qualities of character that I was designed to assess. But no. He didn't know you. That's a lot of faith in a door. He had 1,000 years of faith to invest. Harry turned the cold sphere over in his hands. Did he know it would be a child? He hoped, the Warden said. Adults bring too much certainty. Certainty closes doors. Harry thought about that and decided it was probably true. He put the sphere back on its shelf and picked up the next one. He had, at this point, approximately 400 spheres left to read. He started working through them systematically. He was 9 when he walked through rain without getting wet. Not because he tried to. He'd been crossing from Mrs. Figg's back door to the willow tree in a downpour and had been preoccupied with something he was working out, a problem with the way breath-casting worked at speed, something he and the Warden had been discussing for weeks, and he'd reached the willow tree and ducked under the branches and realized his clothes were perfectly dry. He stood very still and looked at his hands, and looked back at the trail of dry ground he'd left in the wet grass, and felt something complex that was partly wonder and partly something that lived near grief, the particular loneliness of having an extraordinary thing happen and having nobody to tell. He told the Warden, obviously. But the Warden already knew. The magic adjusts to protect you, it said. Once it is sufficiently integrated. You are not keeping rain off, you are resonating at a frequency that water simply navigates around. Like a stone in a river. Is that normal? For someone at your stage of integration, it is within the expected range, yes. Harry filed this away along with everything else. The expected range. He was 9 years old and within the expected range of having magic move around him like water around stone. Right. He was 10 when he read the last sphere and felt the vault breathe. There was no other word for it, the entire room expanding slightly, the light brightening, the Warden standing more fully present than Harry had ever experienced, as though something that had been withheld was now released. You are the first in 12 centuries to read them all, the Warden said, and the words carried something that in a human would have been called emotion. What happens now? Harry asked. Now you begin the second stage. The spheres gave you knowledge. The second stage will give you understanding. They are very different things. What's the difference? Knowledge is what Merlin knew. Understanding is what Merlin was. You will have to find your own version of that. I can guide you to the door, but you'll have to open it yourself. Harry looked at the Warden for a long moment. You know, he said, you get more cryptic the further in we go. That is because the further in you go, the more the answers belong to you rather than to me. Harry stood up and rolled his shoulders and looked around the vault, at the spheres, all of them dark now, emptied into him, their light transferred. At the silver tree with its leaves that moved in no wind. At the sourceless light. At the door behind him. 1 more year, he said. Then I go to Hogwarts. Yes. Will this place still be here? Can I still come back? The vault exists outside the fixed geography of your world. You will be able to access it from Hogwarts as easily as from here. The door will find you, as long as you are looking for it. Harry nodded. He thought about Hogwarts, he knew about it, obviously, had read about it through the spheres, had a complex picture of it that was both historical and theoretical. He knew what the castle was and what it had been and some of what it would do when he arrived. He also knew that knowing about a place and walking into it for the first time were entirely different experiences and that one of them was about to happen for the first time in his life. He found, standing in the vault at age 10, that he was nervous. Not afraid. But nervous, which was different and actually rather pleasant, because it meant something new was coming. What was Hogwarts like when Merlin was young? He asked. It didn't exist yet. He taught the founders. Harry let that sit in the air. Then, he taught Salazar Slytherin. And Godric Gryffindor, and Rowena Ravenclaw, and Helga Hufflepuff, yes. He was disappointed in Slytherin, in the end. Not because Salazar was wrong that bloodlines matter in magic, he wasn't entirely wrong, it is a complex question, but because he chose to use that knowledge to exclude rather than to understand. Merlin found exclusion wasteful. What did he do? He told him he was making a mistake, and Salazar told him to mind his own business, and Merlin left. This is, you will find, a recurring pattern in the history of magic. Someone with significant knowledge is ignored by someone with significant power, and the world is worse for it. Harry smiled at that, genuinely, a real smile, not the careful neutral expression he kept in place on Privet Drive, but the full-face unguarded thing that the vault had been gradually coaxing back into existence over 6 years. That sounds familiar. You will manage it better than Merlin did, the warden said. He had a temper. He was 11 when the owl arrived. It came on a morning in July, and Harry watched it swoop through the kitchen window that Uncle Vernon had inexplicably left cracked, and land on the breakfast table, and stick out its leg with the resigned professionalism of a civil servant, and Vernon went the color of old plum jam and Petunia made a sound like a kettle discovering it has feelings. Harry took the letter. He already knew what it was, had been expecting it, had read about it in the spheres, knew the seal and the crest and the particular crinkle of Hogwarts parchment, which was apparently unique and came from a specific grove of trees planted by Hufflepuff herself. He opened it, read it, and felt that pleasant nervous feeling again, stronger this time. You knew about this, Vernon said. Not a question. A terrible suspicion. Yes, Harry said. There's a school. For people like me, Harry said. Yes. The silence in the kitchen had a specific texture. Dudley was eating cereal with his mouth open and watching the three of them with the satisfied expression of someone who expects entertainment. Petunia was gripping the counter edge. Vernon had gone very still in the particular way of large men who have realized that shouting is not going to fix the thing in front of them. You'll go, then, Petunia said finally. Flat. Not a question either. Yes, Harry said. He looked at them both, at the faces that had been the ceiling of his world for 11 years, that had determined the temperature and texture of most of his days. He felt, looking at them, something that wasn't anger and wasn't forgiveness. Something quieter. He thought about the warden's voice saying you are not dangerous, you are undirected, and thought about the word undirected and how it no longer applied, and how strange it was to have outgrown a cage while still technically living in it. I'll need school supplies, he said. There's a list. He set the list on the table, ate his breakfast, washed his bowl, and went upstairs to start thinking about what to pack. Behind him, in the kitchen, neither Vernon nor Petunia said a single word. The vault, on his last night before Diagon Alley, felt different. Not physically, the stone was the same warm honey color, the light was the same sourceless steady glow, the silver tree was the same silver tree. But the quality of the space had changed, the way a place changes when you know you're leaving it, when you've been somewhere long enough that leaving recalibrates your sense of it. Harry sat under the tree one last time with his eyes open and looked at the empty shelves, all the spheres dark and quiet, their contents now his, and felt the accumulated weight of 6 years of this particular room. I'm scared, he said. Not afraid. Scared, which he'd told the warden was a different thing, months ago, and the warden had asked him to explain the distinction and he'd said, afraid is what you feel when something wants to hurt you, scared is what you feel before something changes your life, and the warden had said that was a very precise taxonomy and he should hold on to it. Yes, the warden said. That's it. Just yes. Scaredness before life change is appropriate. There's nothing to say about it except that it means you're paying attention. Harry leaned his head back against the silver tree. The bark was warm, it was always warm, though he'd never asked why. He thought about the spheres, about Merlin's voice speaking across 1,000 years without using words, about the smell of this place in the first moment the door had swung open when he was 5 and small and hiding from nothing in particular. He thought about breath as magic, and about rivers and stones, and about the difference between a scaffold and a building. "Will you be here?" he asked. "When I come back?" "I will always be here. The vault has no other purpose but you, now. The 1,000 years of waiting are over." Harry stood up, brushed off his trousers, and faced the warden. In 6 years the figure had never become more physically defined, still that peripheral vision shape, that arrangement of presence more than form, but Harry had long ago stopped needing to see it clearly to know it completely. "Thank you," he said. He stopped, because the sentence was too large to finish. "For teaching me. For waiting. For making me feel like I was worth waiting for." The warden inclined its not-quite head. "Go," it said. "The world has been waiting for you too. It just doesn't know it yet." Harry walked back through the door, back under the willow branches, back into the warm night of a Surrey July with stars going in and out behind clouds overhead and the distant hum of the Privet Drive neighborhood doing what it did, lawns and television and the occasional car. He stood in the grass for a moment, 11 years old, with 6 years of primal magic sitting in him like deep water, and looked up at the sky. Tomorrow, Diagon Alley. The wizarding world. The world that had, without knowing it was doing so, sent him to a garden with a willow tree and waited. He breathed in. He breathed out. Something in the air answered. He went inside. Chapter 2, The Boy on the Platform. Diagon Alley smelled like candle wax, old parchment, and something that Harry could only describe as concentrated possibility, the same bass note that the vault carried, but thinner here, more dispersed, spread across 1,000 competing magical objects and people and animals all existing within a few cobblestone streets. He stood at the entrance, just through the leaky cauldron's back door, and let himself feel it for a moment before moving. Hagrid stood beside him, enormous and cheerful and slightly out of breath from the journey, and watched Harry with an expression of delighted anticipation, the expression of someone who has been waiting to show a child Christmas morning. Harry had liked Hagrid immediately. He'd arrived on the doorstep of No. 4 the previous evening in a motorcycle that descended from the sky and a cloud of cheerful booming noise, and he'd handed Harry a slightly squashed birthday cake with "Happy Birthday Harry" written in green icing, and looked at him with those beetle-black eyes with an expression of genuine warmth that Harry recognized as rare and real. When Vernon had blustered and Hagrid had given Dudley a pig's tail with a casual flick of the pink umbrella he was trying not to use as a wand, Harry had felt something very like affection for this enormous, slightly chaotic man. Not everyone was careful. Some people were just good. "Well," Hagrid said, looking down at him. "What do ya think?" "I think," Harry said, watching a witch negotiate with a cauldron that seemed to have opinions about being purchased, "it's louder than I expected." "First time seein' hit, oh, course it is." "Wait till ye see Gringotts, the Goblin Bank," Harry said. Founded 1474. The vaults use a combination of magical creature guardianship and spatial dislocation charms. The deeper the vault, the further it sits outside normal geography. He paused. "Sorry. I read a lot." Hagrid stared at him. Then he let out a booming laugh that startled a nearby owl into a frenzy. "Where'd ya read that?" "Not in any Muggle book, I'd wager." "No," Harry agreed, and didn't elaborate. They moved into the alley, and the alley moved around them. Harry had known, theoretically, that the magical world existed. He'd had the architecture of it in his mind since he was 8, the shape and history and politics and culture of it, absorbed through Merlin's impressions the way you absorb a language by living in it. But theory and the actual sensory reality of standing in Diagon Alley on a Tuesday in July were, as he'd always suspected they'd be, genuinely different things. The colors were brighter than he'd imagined. The noise was more layered. The magic was everywhere, woven so thickly into the stones and shop fronts and people that he could feel it pressing against his own like a conversation conducted in a language he'd been studying in private and was now hearing spoken aloud for the first time. He kept his reaction contained. He was 11, and he had learned that extraordinary things were best experienced fully on the inside before you express them on the outside. But walking through Diagon Alley for the first time, Harry Potter felt, quietly and completely, like something had slotted into its right place. Gringotts looked the way everything important looks, larger in person. The marble columns, the bronze doors, the long warning poem about touching the contents of other people's vaults, which Harry had also read, through the spheres, though that particular sphere had carried a very distinct flavor of amusement, Merlin had found goblin institutional pride entertaining. The goblins themselves moved with the efficient economy of people who had been managing other people's money for long enough to have developed a comprehensive contempt for most of those people. The goblin at the main desk looked up at Harry's approach with the standard-issue blankness of someone performing a role, started to say something routine, and then stopped. It was subtle. A flicker. The long fingers paused on whatever they'd been writing. The amber eyes, clever, ancient eyes, far older than the face containing them, settled on Harry with a quality of attention that was not standard issue at all. Harry held the gaze without adjusting his own expression. Harry Potter, Hagrid announced, with the pride of someone introducing a celebrity. Come to collect summit from his vault. And Professor Dumbledore wants us to collect he patted his pockets with exaggerated casualness, the other thing. Indeed, the goblin said, without breaking eye contact with Harry. Then, and Harry was quite sure this wasn't standard practice, the goblin inclined its head. Not a bow, goblins didn't bow to wizards, as a rule, but a specific, deliberate acknowledgement, the kind exchanged between entities that recognize something in each other. Harry inclined his head in return. The same degree. The same precision. Something moved through the goblin's expression, through the entire row of goblins visible behind the counter, actually, a kind of ripple, heads coming up from their work, attention redirecting. Hagrid noticed none of this. He was signing the withdrawal form with the focused effort of a man for whom paperwork is a physical challenge. The vault cart ride was everything the sphere had implied and considerably more in terms of actual stomach displacement. Harry held the side and watched the tunnels blur past and felt the spatial geometry shifting around them as they went deeper, the clean, algorithmic magic of the dislocation charms brushing up against his own in a way that reminded him, not unpleasantly, of two people accidentally touching hands. He noted the increasing complexity of the wards. He noted, at the deepest levels they passed, a signature in the stonework that was very, very old. Older than Gringotts. Older than the Ministry, older than Hogwarts. Something that had been here before humans put a name on the land. He recognized it. It was primal, not Merlin specifically, but the same base element. The same root. He filed this away under interesting and watched the rest of the tunnels go by. His vault was, well, it was substantial. Hagrid's expression when it opened suggested he was surprised, though Harry had known roughly what to expect. He took what he needed, left what he didn't, and spent approximately 30 seconds in the vault before he got the feeling he needed to breathe outdoor air again. Something about enclosed spaces very full of gold had a particular quality to it. He'd grown up in a cupboard, and he was fine with small spaces, but gold had a specific energetic weight that he found slightly uncomfortable, like a tone held just slightly too long. He didn't examine why. The rest of the morning was a cascade of new things, each one stacking on the last. Madame Malkin's robe's fitting was quick and routine, except that he ended up standing on the platform next to a pale blonde boy who introduced himself with the particular manner of someone who has been told since birth that his name means something. Draco Malfoy, the boy said, holding his arms out while the measuring tape did its work. Harry Potter, Harry said. The resulting silence had a complicated texture. Draco Malfoy turned his head to look at Harry with an expression that reorganized itself in real time, the automatic assessment of a child raised to rank people on sight, cycling through what he knew and what it meant and how to position himself accordingly. "I've heard about you," Draco said finally. "Cautious now. Recalibrating." "Most people have," Harry said pleasantly. "It doesn't usually tell them much about me." Draco blinked. Then, surprising Harry slightly, he smiled, not the performing smile, but something more genuine, the expression of someone who has just encountered something unexpected and found it interesting rather than threatening. "Father says you'll either be a tremendous asset or a tremendous problem. Which does he think is more likely?" "He hasn't decided." Draco studied him sideways. "He's not usually undecided about things. That must be novel for him." Another blink. Another recalibration. Harry thought, watching the process, that Draco Malfoy was probably more intelligent than most people gave him credit for. There was a quick, adaptive quality to his thinking that Harry found genuinely interesting. Whether that intelligence was going to be used well was a different question, and not one Harry could answer standing in a robe-fitting shop for 10 minutes. "Slytherin or Gryffindor?" Draco asked. The question came out with the tone of someone asking whether you take your tea with milk, both a genuine question and a kind of test. "I genuinely don't know," Harry said. Draco looked skeptical. Harry shrugged and stepped off the platform and let Madame Malkin finish his hem adjustment. He was done before Draco's robes were finished, and he said something polite and non-committal, and left, and stood on the pavement in the sun and thought about the way Draco Malfoy had looked at him, that quick, adaptive intelligence trying to find a category and coming up empty, and thought that Hogwarts was probably going to be more interesting than he'd planned for. Ollivanders was at the end of a narrow street that looked, compared to the rest of Diagon Alley's cheerful commercial bustle, like it had decided not to participate. The sign was faded. The single wand in the window display was dusty. The door opened with the sigh of something that had been breathing quietly for a very long time, and the shop beyond it was narrow and dim and smelled of sawdust and something Harry recognized immediately, old magic, deep magic, the same undercurrent that ran through the vault's walls but here expressed as craftsmanship rather than architecture. Hagrid took up most of the available space just by existing, and seemed to sense that this was not a place where his particular energy was the right fit. He settled near the door like a friendly avalanche making itself comfortable. Harry stood in the middle of the floor, and waited. Ollivander appeared from the back the way cats appear from nowhere, suddenly present without any convincing evidence of transit. He was ancient in the way certain things are ancient, not decayed, but distilled. Pale eyes, silver hair, the particular economy of movement of someone who has spent decades in a small space and learned its precise dimensions. He looked at Harry, and Harry looked at him, and something passed between them that wasn't communication exactly but was adjacent to it. "Harry Potter," Ollivander said softly. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." He moved closer with the focused attention of a jeweler examining a stone of uncertain provenance. "I remember every wand I've sold, Mr. Potter. Every single one. It is the wand that chooses the wizard, of course, but I have found, in 70 years of this, that I can usually make an educated prediction. Within a range." "And me?" Harry asked. Ollivander stopped approximately 3 feet away, which was slightly further than the distance he'd moved to assess other customers, based on what Harry could read from the shop's configuration. His pale eyes moved over Harry's face, then, and this was interesting, seemed to look somewhere slightly beyond his face, or perhaps at something overlaid on it that wasn't strictly visible in the normal sense. "You," Ollivander said quietly, "are not within the range." He paused. "Your mother had a wand of willow. 10¼ inches, swishy. Excellent for charms work." Another pause, longer. "Your father, mahogany. Pliable. Excellent for transfiguration. I'd expect something in that family, perhaps. Something that runs in the line." He was watching Harry very closely now. "But I don't think that's what's coming." He began pulling boxes. The first wand, vine, dragon heartstring, 8 inches, dissolved Harry's composure for exactly half a second as he felt it, because it was like touching a live wire. The wand went immediately and extremely active, and before Harry could stop it something like a pressure wave moved outward and shook approximately 7 boxes off their shelves. Ollivander caught the boxes with a gesture so practiced it was almost subconscious, and Harry set the wand down carefully on the counter, and they looked at each other. "That," Ollivander said, with the tone of someone whose suspicions have been confirmed in a way they're not entirely sure they wanted confirmed, "is unusual." "Sorry about the boxes," Harry said. "Don't apologize. I've been doing this for 70 years. 11-year-olds who knock things off shelves are not unusual." He put the vine wand away. "What is unusual is the quality of the response. The wand should choose the wizard, that wand was choosing, but whatever it connected to was considerably more than it was built to contain." He was watching Harry with those pale eyes, really watching now, the professional assessment deepening into something more personal. "Where have you been, Mr. Potter?" "For 11 years. "Because you are not," he stopped himself. "Started again. The magic on you is very old." "I know," Harry said. Ollivander held his gaze. Then he nodded once, went further into the shop than Harry could see, and came back with a box that was different from the others, the wood darker, the brass clasp slightly tarnished, a label on the side written in a script that Harry recognized as 11th century English and which read, in translation, "For the finding." He set it on the counter and opened it. The wand inside was 11 inches, dark wood, holly, Harry thought, and then looked closer and felt the wrongness of that, felt how the wood was holly at the surface but something else entirely underneath, something that had been part of a living tree when that tree had been grown from a seed planted by a spell. Dragon heartstring, yes, but harvested at the moment of the dragon's greatest breath, which was apparently a thing that happened once per dragon and could only be recognized and harvested by someone who had been present for it with the intention to do so, which meant this heartstring had a specific provenance and a specific age, and that age was, "How old is this wand?" Harry asked. Ollivander's expression was unreadable. "I inherited it from my master, who inherited it from his. The wand maker who crafted it left no record of the date. Only a note that said it was to be kept until the right person." Harry picked it up. The shop went quiet. Not silent, not the absence of sound, but the arrival of a particular quality that is different from normal quiet, the way a held breath is different from the gap between words. The wand warmed in his hand immediately, not with a dramatic shower of sparks or a burst of light, but with the deep, settling warmth of something recognizing something. Harry felt it in his palm, in his wrist, moving up his arm like warm water, and felt his own magic, the primal core he'd been carefully tending for 6 years, reach toward it in the same way he'd once reached toward the door in the roots of the willow tree. Recognizing something. Coming home. Gold sparks, finally. Not a shower, a slow fall, like leaves, unhurried and warm. "Well," Ollivander said, very quietly. He had taken one unconscious step backward. "Well. It works," Harry said. "Mr. Potter." Ollivander's voice was careful now, each word placed precisely. "The wand chooses the wizard. That is the principle on which this craft has operated for millennia. But on very rare occasions I have encountered twice in 70 years, the match is not simply compatible. It is intended. As though the wand was waiting for a specific person." He looked at the wand in Harry's hand. "I would very much like to know what has been done to that wand." "I don't think anything was done to it," Harry said. "I think it was made this way." Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. "Where did you learn about wand lore?" "I read it," Harry said. Then, because Ollivander had been honest with him and that deserved reciprocity, he added, "From very old sources." Ollivander seemed to make a decision. He leaned on the counter and spoke quietly, too quietly for Hagrid to hear. "There is a theory, not widely accepted, considered rather fringe by the Wandmakers' Guild, that the oldest wand craft drew on something preclassical. Before phoenix feathers and dragon heartstrings were catalogued, before the standardization of cores. A time when the making of a wand was more like the making of a key than the making of a tool. He paused. I have wondered, for a long time, whether this wand was made in that tradition. 11¼ inches, Harry said. He was still holding it. It still felt like warmth, like river water over stone. Holly surface grain, but the core is older than the holly. And the heartstring is from the first breath. Ollivander went very still. You can feel that. Yes. From holding it. Yes. A long silence. Outside in the alley, someone dropped something metallic and a child laughed and the world continued doing what it did, entirely unaware that inside a dusty narrow shop an old wandmaker was quietly revising every assumption he'd arrived at work with that morning. 7 galleons, Ollivander said finally. Harry paid him, took the box, and walked back to Hagrid, who was examining a display of wand care products with the focused interest of a man who doesn't know what he's looking at but is trying to be polite about it. Got one? Hagrid said, brightening. Got one, Harry agreed. He did not mention what Ollivander had said. He tucked the wand into the pocket of his new jeans, not the box, the wand itself, because it was his and he was keeping it close, and they went to get his other supplies, and the ordinary rhythm of the alley carried them forward and didn't notice the particular quality of the 11-year-old moving through it. Except, here and there, things that were sensitive noticed. The cauldrons they passed in the apothecary district seemed to ring slightly, a single high tone. The owl in Elops who had been asleep for 3 hours opened one eye as Harry walked past, turned its head, and watched him all the way down the street. A very old wizard sitting outside Flourish and Blots lowered his newspaper and watched Harry with rheumy, alert eyes, and when Harry met his gaze the old wizard nodded once, slow and deliberate, and raised his cup of tea in a toast. Harry nodded back, and kept walking. Platform 9¾ was chaos in the best possible way. Harry arrived alone, he'd thanked Hagrid genuinely, and Hagrid had gone red and emotional and crushed him in a hug and told him to write, which Harry had promised to do. He'd managed the trolley and the barrier by himself, stepping through the solid-looking wall with the ease of someone who had spent 6 years walking through a door that wasn't there, and emerged onto the platform into a wall of steam and noise and motion that was, there was no other word, joyful. Families. Children. Owls in cages and cats in baskets and one extremely large toad that was making its displeasure known. First years looking terrified and overwhelmed. Older students calling across platforms to each other with the relaxed familiarity of people returning to a home they'd been missing since June. Parents pressing sandwiches and advice onto children who were already mentally aboard the train. Harry stood with his trolley and took it all in, feeling the particular specific happiness of someone who has arrived somewhere they've been moving toward for a long time. The Weasleys were impossible to miss. Not because of the red hair, though there was a lot of it. 7 people's worth of red hair in various heights and ages was genuinely visually arresting. Not because of the noise, though they were certainly generating their share. But because they had a quality, a warmth that radiated outward the way the silver tree in the vault radiated warmth, not directional but ambient, the simple heat of people who genuinely like each other inhabiting the same space. Harry had not grown up with that quality and recognized it precisely because of its absence in his own history. He ended up near them in the natural flow of platform navigation, and it was the smallest one, round-faced, slightly lost-looking, holding a toad in both hands with the expression of someone who has already lost this toad twice and is terrified of losing it again, who Harry ended up beside at the train door. "Need a hand?" Harry said. The boy looked up. Brown eyes, soft expression, the particular look of someone who has been told often enough that they're not much good at things that they've started to believe it. He glanced at the toad, glanced at his trunk, glanced at Harry. "I've got him," he said, in the tone of someone who is absolutely not confident he has him. "He keeps getting away. I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter." Neville's eyes went wide for a second, the standard response, and then something curious happened. The awe passed through him quickly, like a cloud going over, and what replaced it was simply interest. "Are you nervous?" Neville asked, with the directness of someone too preoccupied with their own nerves to manage social filtering. About Hogwarts? A bit, Harry said, and meant it. Scared, mostly. The good kind. I'm the bad kind of scared, Neville said honestly. My gran says I'm not powerful enough and she's probably right. Harry looked at him, really looked, the way the vault had trained him to look, past the surface reading to the thing underneath. There was something in Neville Longbottom that was not absent strength but compressed strength, magic pushed inward by years of being told it wasn't good enough, coiled tight by expectation and anxiety, present but unaccessed. He knew that quality. He'd felt its inverse in himself, in the early years in the vault, before the training had given the magic a proper direction to move. Your gran's wrong, Harry said simply. Neville blinked. You don't know that. I can usually tell, Harry said, which was entirely true. He smiled, the real one, the full-face one. Come on. Let's find a compartment. They found one near the front of the train. Harry got his trunk in without difficulty and helped Neville with his, and the toad, whose name was Trevor, Harry learned, was secured in the mesh pocket behind the seat where he would hopefully stay. They sat across from each other as the platform outside the window began its slow glide backward, and the Hogwarts Express moved, and England began scrolling past in the vivid green of late summer. Have you been to London before? Neville asked. No, Harry said. You. Gran takes me every summer to the apothecary. She makes a whole thing of it. He paused. She has very specific opinions about things. Most people's grans do, Harry said. Neville smiled a little. It changed his face considerably, opened something in it. She had very specific opinions about whether I should come to Hogwarts at all. She thought I might not show enough aptitude. He stopped. Looked out the window. I dropped a cauldron on her cat once and she took that as evidence. Dropping a cauldron on a cat is at least evidence of something, Harry said. Whether its lack of aptitude is debatable. Neville laughed, short, surprised, the laugh of someone who hadn't expected to find anything funny. Harry filed this away. He liked Neville Longbottom. He'd read about him, through the spheres, not about Neville specifically, but about the Longbottom line, old magic, deep roots, a family with a connection to earth and growth magic that went back centuries and had never been properly cultivated because the magical world tended to value flashy over foundational. He hadn't known what Neville would be like as a person. He was deciding, based on 10 minutes, that the answer was good. Genuinely good, in the core deep way that mattered. The compartment door slid open around midway through the journey, and Ron Weasley came in first, the second youngest of that impressive red-haired platform family, freckled and slightly gangly, with an open face and the immediate ease of someone who has grown up in a very full house and has no fear of strangers. Mind if we sit? He said. Everywhere else is full or weird. Weird how? Harry asked. There's a compartment full of fifth years doing something with a fanged frisbee that I'm fairly certain is against at least 4 rules. Ron dropped into the seat beside Neville with the boneless collapse of someone very tall and not yet entirely sure what to do about it. I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Neville Longbottom. Ron looked at Harry with the frank assessment he probably didn't know he was making. Blimey, he said. Then, to his credit, he moved past it immediately. I've got 6 brothers. Well, 5, and a sister. Bill and Charlie are done with school, Percy's insufferable, Fred and George are, he reconsidered, they're a force of nature, let's say. And Ginny's starting next year. He looked at Neville. Is that a toad? His name's Trevor, Neville said, with the air of someone expecting judgment. Brilliant, Ron said, entirely sincerely. I've got an owl. He's asleep. The door opened again and Hermione Granger arrived with the energy of someone who has been moving purposefully through the train looking for something and has concluded she might as well stop here. She was neat and alert and her eyes moved over the compartment with the quick inventory of a very organized mind, books, trunk placement, people, seating arrangement, Toad, and she sat down beside Harry with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who has made a decision and is not inviting debate about it. I'm Hermione Granger. Have either of you done the reading? I've done all of it, obviously, but I was wondering whether everyone had read the supplementary texts because some of the spells referenced in A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration actually connect to a theorem in magical theory that Adalbert Waffling wrote in 1952, which is quite interesting if you... She stopped. She had been looking at Harry while she talked, and something in his expression had caught her attention. What? Which theorem? Harry said. She blinked. The conservation of magical intent. The idea that the intended outcome of a spell is preserved even when the incantation is imperfect, as long as the magical signature of the caster is strong enough. It's a good theorem, Harry said. Incomplete, though. Hermione's expression did the same thing Draco Malfoy's had done earlier, a rapid internal recalibration. Incomplete how? Waffling assumes the bottleneck is incantation precision. But incantation is scaffolding. The actual limiting factor is the strength of the intention before it gets expressed as language. You can have a perfect incantation and a weak intention and the spell will underperform. And you can have no incantation at all and a strong enough intention and the spell will happen anyway. Harry paused. His sample set was too small. He was working from wand-cast spells exclusively and didn't account for wandless casting, which behaves differently at the conservation level. Hermione stared at him. That's not in any of the textbooks. No, Harry agreed. Then how do you know it? I worked it out, Harry said. From first principles. The silence in the compartment had a specific quality. Ron was looking between Harry and Hermione with the expression of someone watching a tennis match that's moving slightly too fast, and Neville was watching Harry with an expression that was partly surprised and partly something that looked a great deal like I knew it. Show me, Hermione said. Flat out. No preamble, no social softening, just the pure demand of an intellect that has found something it wants. Harry held out his hand, palm up, and called the flame, the amber one, the small one he'd been doing since he was 6, except it came faster now, easier, the way anything does after 5 years of daily practice. It sat in his palm, sourceless and warm, giving off light without shadow. Hermione's eyes were very wide. Ron made a sound. Neville said, quietly, I knew it. The flame lasted about 20 seconds and then Harry let it go, closing his hand and releasing it the same way you release a breath. No wand, Hermione said. No wand, Harry confirmed. No incantation. No incantation. How? She stopped herself, visibly collecting her thoughts, sorting through the implications with the systematic rigor of a very good mind encountering a thing that rewrites its operating assumptions. How long have you been able to do that? Since I was 6, Harry said. And the wandless, wordless theory you just described, that's how you do it. More or less. The technical picture is a bit more complicated, but yes. She sat back and folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with the expression of someone who has just decided something. You're going to tell me more about this, she said. A lot more. Not right now, obviously, but, she gestured at the compartment, at the 4 of them, at the train moving through the English countryside towards something unprecedented. We have the whole year. We do, Harry agreed. I'm Ron, Ron said, to nobody in particular, with the expression of someone who has been sitting in an extraordinary conversation and has only just confirmed he's actually present in it. We know, Harry said. You told us. Just, making sure I was still here. Neville started laughing first, and then Harry, and then reluctantly and then fully Hermione, and outside the window England was going golden in the late afternoon, rolling hills and hedgerows and the particular amber light of a summer day heading toward evening, and the Hogwarts Express ran north through all of it carrying 4 children who had, in the space of a single train journey, become something that would take a little while to find the right word for but would eventually be called inevitable. The boats were Harry's favorite part. The carriages and the crowd and the older students all heading up the hill in the more mundane transportation, those were fine. But the first years in the boats on the Black Lake, with Hagrid's lantern ahead of them swaying like a small sun, and the castle appearing around the headland in the dark, that was something Harry had not been prepared for, and he was glad he hadn't been. He'd known about Hogwarts. He'd known its history and its architecture and its enchantments and the 4 founders and the 1,000 years of magic soaked into its stones. But knowledge, as the Warden had told him long ago, was not understanding. And understanding came only from experience. The castle was, alive wasn't quite the right word, because it implied something it wasn't. But it was responsive. He could feel it the moment the boats hit the water, the castle's awareness, the ancient magic woven through its foundations, stretching outward across the lake like a hand on still water, and the ripple moving outward until it found him, and the pause that followed. Recognition. Not personal recognition, it didn't know him specifically. But it recognized the quality of what he carried, the same way the Gringotts goblin had recognized it, the same way Ollivander's shop had responded. The castle knew primal magic. It had been built by people who knew primal magic, and 1,000 years ago it had felt it often, and then gradually less and less, and now the frequency of it had been absent for so long that the castle's response to suddenly feeling it again was, Harry could only describe it as waking up, a slow brightening in the stones, a warmth in the deep foundations. He sat in the boat with Neville across from him and Hermione beside him and let the castle feel him back, let his own awareness move outward across the water and through the stones and understand the shape of where he was going to live. Neville said softly, "Can you feel that?" Harry looked at him. "Feel what?" "Something in the, I don't know. The air." It went warm for a second. Neville was frowning slightly, confused but not afraid. Probably just the lake. Harry considered the boy across from him, with his earth magic roots and his compressed potential and his grandmother's voice telling him for years that he wasn't enough. He thought about what the vault had given him, direction, training, understanding, purpose. He thought about how different things might have been, without that door in the roots of the willow tree, without the Warden's patient voice, without 6 years of having somewhere to belong. "It's the castle," Harry said quietly. "It's old, and it's been feeling something it hasn't felt in a while. It's not a bad feeling." Neville looked at him steadily, trying to determine whether this was information or metaphor. "How do you know that?" Harry smiled, and looked up at the castle rising above them, its towers lit against the dark sky, its reflection shivering on the black water below. "I'll explain it eventually," he said. "I promise." Neville nodded. That was enough, apparently. He trusted easily, Harry thought, not naively, not carelessly, but with the trust of someone who has learned that it's better to be occasionally wrong about people than to keep everyone at a permanent distance. That was a quality Harry respected. The boats touched the far bank. Hagrid was first out, lantern raised, herding first years toward the great stone steps with the gentle authority of someone whose size alone provides most of the necessary crowd management. Harry stepped out of the boat, felt the flagstone under his feet, felt the castle above him enormous and warm and awake, and looked up at the open door where the yellow light was spilling out and the whole of his next 7 years was waiting. He breathed in. He breathed out. The castle seemed to breathe with him. He walked up the steps and through the door, and Hogwarts closed around him like a hand, warm and deliberate, and in the very deep foundations, somewhere below the dungeons and the lake bed and the old stone that predated Hogwarts entirely, something that had been almost asleep for 1,000 years opened one eye. Behind him, on the dark surface of the lake, the water where his boat had been was very slightly luminous. It faded before anyone noticed. Almost. Chapter 3, What the Sorting Hat Said. The antechamber off the great hall smelled like candle smoke and nervous children. It was a small stone room, more of a wide corridor, really, and approximately 40 first years had been crammed into it by Professor McGonagall, who had arrived at the entrance hall with the manner of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and found it simultaneously important and logistically tiresome. She was sharp-faced and precise, and her voice had the quality of a ruler drawn across a desk, commanding attention without raising itself to do so. She looked over the assembled first years with the practiced scan of someone sorting by potential rather than appearance, and Harry had gotten the distinct impression that she'd paused on him for slightly longer than anyone else before moving on. Now she was gone, back through the doors into the great hall, and 40 children were standing in a stone room trying to manage the competing needs of appearing calm and absolutely not appearing calm. Harry stood near the back of the group, where the cold was coming in from a draft under the stones, and watched. Not strategically, he wasn't taking notes, wasn't evaluating anyone. He just found people interesting, the same way he'd found the beetle interesting on the day he'd first found the vault, the same way he found anything moving through its natural patterns of behavior interesting. Ron was beside him, managing his anxiety by talking at slightly above conversational volume to Fred and George, who had apparently materialized from somewhere to wish him luck and say several things that were probably meant to be comforting but were having the opposite effect. Neville had gone quiet, which Harry had already learned meant he was inside his own head, working himself into a spiral that would not improve without external interruption. Hermione, near the front, was reading a small book she'd produced from somewhere in her robes, not showing off, Harry had decided. Genuinely just more comfortable with text in her hands. Then someone screamed. Not a person, the ghosts arrived through the wall in a burst of pearlescent cold, and the scream was a collective first-year reaction to the sudden appearance of approximately 12 translucent dead people gliding through solid stone as if it were mist. Nearly headless Nick drifted to the front with the benevolent air of someone accustomed to this reception. The bloody Baron materialized at the back and several children made room for him immediately. Harry looked at the bloody Baron with academic interest. The silver stains on his robes, blood, obviously, centuries old and spectral, had a story attached that was one of the sadder ones in the spheres. Not a villainous man. A desperate one. There was a difference. The bloody Baron drifted toward him with the natural movement of a ghost that has inhabited a space long enough to have preferences about it, and stopped when he reached Harry. He had empty silver eyes and an expression that did not change and had not changed in about 500 years. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Something passed between them, something Harry didn't have a name for, but which felt like acknowledgement. The Baron inclined his head, slowly, the same degree as the Gringotts goblin had. Then he drifted away and said nothing, and the ghosts moved on with their welcoming patter, and Ron appeared at Harry's elbow wearing an expression of pure bewilderment. "Did the bloody Baron just bow to you?" Ron said, very quietly. "Incline his head," Harry said. "It's different." "How is it different?" "A bow is deference." That was, recognition, more like. Ron stared at him. "You've been here for 20 minutes. I know. That's the bloody Baron." "He doesn't," Ron looked across at the ghost, now entertaining a group of Hufflepuffs. "He doesn't do that. My brothers have been here for years. He's never done that for them." "He probably had no reason to," Harry said mildly. Ron opened his mouth, closed it again, and appeared to file this under a growing category of things about Harry Potter that he was choosing to simply accept rather than interrogate because interrogating them raised more questions than it settled. McGonagall came back and the first years assembled themselves into something approximately line-shaped, and the doors to the great hall opened, and the ceiling happened to everyone. Harry had read about the ceiling. It was a perfect enchanted reflection of the sky outside, tonight, scattered stars and the suggestion of cloud, a sliver of new moon. Knowing it was there had not prevented the specific impact of actually looking up at it, the spatial vertigo of a stone ceiling that wasn't a ceiling, the sense that the great hall extended upward into actual sky. He heard Hermione beside him say something about the enchantment and Dumbledore's work and Professor Flitwick's charm refinements, and he let the information wash past him because right now he was just looking at the stars. The 4 tables stretched the length of the hall, heavy with candles and silver. Hundreds of faces turned toward the first years as they walked, the older students, assessing the incoming year with the comfortable superiority of those who had already survived the thing the newcomers were about to face. Harry walked without adjusting his pace or dropping his eyes, and didn't clock the murmuring that moved through the older students in the Gryffindor and Slytherin tables as he passed, though he was aware of it. He was aware of most things. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool in front of the staff table, old, patched, fraying at the brim, so naturally battered that it looked like it had been sitting on that stool since the castle was built, which, Harry reflected, was approximately accurate. He watched it, and after a moment it seemed to feel his attention, because the brim shifted slightly in a way that wasn't quite looking back but was adjacent to it. Then the hat's brim opened into a mouth and it began to sing. Harry had read about the song. It was different every year, a new composition produced by whatever internal process a 1,000-year-old enchanted hat used to generate poetry. He listened to this one with genuine enjoyment. It was actually quite good. Somebody at some point in the hat's history had put real craft into the underlying enchantment. McGonagall unrolled her scroll. The sorting began. He watched the others go up, Hannah Abbott, Susan Bones, Terry Boot, the hat touching their heads and reaching, presumably, whatever it reached. Some took a moment. Justin Finch-Fletchley was quick. Hermione was called before Harry and walked up with the steady composure of someone who has prepared for every eventuality and is prepared for this one too, and the hat barely touched her head before it called out Gryffindor in the tone of something that has made up its mind before the question finished forming. Hermione beamed, the unguarded smile of someone receiving exactly the answer they'd hoped for, and walked to the Gryffindor table, and turned to find Harry in the line of remaining first years, and gave him a look that said your turn is coming with a precision that was more communicative than most people's full sentences. Neville went up when his name was called with the expression of someone walking to their own execution, and the hat sat on his head for a long time, longer than most, the student body shifting slightly with interest, someone along the Hufflepuff table whispering, and then said Gryffindor in a voice that carried a peculiar conviction. Neville's face went blank with relief, then shifted to something warmer, and he walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down beside Hermione, and she said something to him that made his shoulders unknot. Harry watched from the line and thought, good. Then McGonagall called Potter, Harry, and the great hall went quiet. Not gradually, not in a wave. All at once, the way sound stops when something interrupts the frequency it was traveling on. 400 students and a staff table full of professors and a ceiling full of stars and the single word Potter and silence, immediate and total. Harry walked up to the stool. He was aware of the quality of attention in the room, the specific density of it, the way a large number of people focusing on a single point created something almost physical. He sat on the stool, and McGonagall lifted the hat and placed it on his head, and it dropped down over his eyes and everything went dark and private. Hello, said the hat. Not out loud. Inside, the same quality as the warden's voice, words arriving already assembled. Harry found this comforting in a way he hadn't expected. Hello, Harry thought back. A pause. Then, well. Another pause, longer. Well. Is that good or bad? Neither. The hat seemed to search for a word. I have sorted 11,407 students in my operational lifetime. I have encountered every configuration of ability, ambition, courage, and wit that the human magical spectrum produces. I have seen dark wizards and great ones and mediocre ones and some who were simply very dedicated to growing specific varieties of mushroom. A beat. I have never encountered this. What is this? You. The hat's internal voice had a quality Harry was trying to pin down, it wasn't impressed, exactly. It was something more careful than impressed. The magic in you is not Hogwarts magic. It is not the magic I was built to sort. It predates the founders. It predates the framework I use to categorize. If I sort you according to my usual methodology, the exercise will be, a pause that contains something like dry humor, somewhat reductive. Then what do you do? I ask. I have never asked before. What do you want to be? Harry sat with that question in the dark under the hat, and the great hall waited around him in its enormous silence, and he thought about what the warden had told him when he was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, about rivers and directions, about scaffolding and buildings, about knowledge and understanding. He thought about Merlin, who had taught the founders and been frustrated by Slytherin and left the vault and trusted a 1,000-year-old door with everything he was. Which house would Merlin have been in? He asked the same question, once. The Hat's voice carried something that was not quite surprise. He sat on this stool. Much older, obviously. He was testing us, I believe. What did you tell him? That he was all 4 houses at once and that the division was always somewhat arbitrary for the very oldest kind of power. That what mattered was not where you were placed but what you chose to do with the placement. A pause. He told me I was wise for a hat. I found it mildly patronizing. Harry smiled in the dark. I want Gryffindor, he said. Not because of his parents, though that was part of it. Not because of the alternatives. But because the courage that Gryffindor valued was not the loudest kind or the most performative kind. At its best, in its truest form, it was the courage to be exactly what you were without apologizing for it. Harry had spent 6 years in a hidden vault doing exactly that. It felt appropriate. Yes, the Hat said, with a quality of satisfaction. I thought you might. Then, out loud, to the hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. The eruption was loud enough and sudden enough after the extended silence that several people flinched. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall, and walked to the Gryffindor table, and the noise followed him like a physical thing. He sat down across from Neville and beside Ron, who had been sorted while Harry was still registering the Hat's conversation, and Ron clapped him on the back with the genuine enthusiasm of someone who has decided to be delighted by this outcome. Knew it, Ron said. Gryffindor. Obviously. How long was I up there? Harry asked. Ages, said one of the twins, Fred, Harry thought, though he was not entirely sure yet. 7 minutes. Percy looked like he was going to have a medical event. It was very dramatic, the other twin, George, confirmed. The whole hall went so quiet you could hear McGonagall's quill scratching. McGonagall's quill wasn't scratching, Harry said. She'd stopped writing. Both twins looked at him. Then at each other. Then back at him. You couldn't see her from the stool, Fred said. No, Harry agreed. Another exchange of looks between the twins that was less readable than most but contained something Harry recognized as recalibration underneath the poker face. Then George smiled, the full, brilliant, genuinely delighted smile of someone who has just identified a new and interesting variable, and said, Harry Potter, I think this is going to be an excellent year. I hope so, Harry said, and meant it. The feast was extraordinary. Not because Harry hadn't eaten well before, the vault had, in some indirect and inexplicable way, improved his general physical condition over 6 years, the magic's integration making his body more efficient in ways that were technically impossible and practically undeniable. He was healthy despite the Dursleys' best efforts to the contrary. But the quality of the food was something his nutritional history hadn't prepared him for, the specific abundance of it, the way the plates simply arrived full and kept arriving, and the whole hall eating together with the communal ease of people who were used to this as the structure of their days. He ate and listened and watched, and the conversation around him layered into something rich and informative. Percival Weasley at the far end of the table was telling anyone who would listen about the importance of following rules, which Fred and George were counterpointing with a series of examples from their own rule-following record that contradicted this thesis comprehensively. Hermione was already asking an older Gryffindor girl about class scheduling with the focused efficiency of someone filing information for future use. Neville was eating with the concentration of someone who has been too nervous to eat all day and is now addressing that. Harry looked at the staff table. Professor Quirrell he'd identified immediately, anxious face, substantial stammer in the few words Harry had caught when they'd entered, the purple turban wrapped around his head in a way that was genuinely unusual even by wizarding standards. Harry looked at him the way you look at something that is trying very hard to look like something it isn't, because the magic around Quirrell had a quality that didn't match the presentation. There was a resonance underneath the nervous professor persona, something doubled, something layered. Like a chord with a wrong note buried inside it that most ears couldn't isolate. Harry isolated it immediately and sat with it. He looked at Dumbledore. The headmaster was watching the feast with the benevolent satisfaction of someone who loves the thing they've built. He looked old, not decrepit, but genuinely, deeply old, in the way that certain people are when the years have accumulated into something that enhances rather than diminishes them. His eyes, when they moved across the Gryffindor table, had the quality Harry associated with very competent intelligence, the capacity to look at multiple things simultaneously and extract meaning from the combination. Those eyes reached Harry. They held. Harry held back. Dumbledore's expression did not change, but something shifted in the quality of his attention, a sharpening, a deepening, the expression of a man who has encountered something that requires more processing than his usual real-time assessment provides. His eyes were very blue and very bright, and they looked at Harry the way you look at a chessboard when someone has made an unexpected move that is either brilliant or incomprehensible and you're not yet sure which. Harry nodded politely. After a moment, Dumbledore nodded back. Ron, who had been reaching for more chicken, paused and looked between Harry and the headmaster and said, very quietly, "Did you just have a staring contest with Dumbledore?" "I nodded at him," Harry said. He nodded back. "Yes. Dumbledore," Ron emphasized. "The actual Dumbledore." "I know who he is, Ron." Ron put the chicken down. Picked it up again. "You're very odd," he said, in the tone of someone making a statement they find genuinely positive. "I know that too," Harry said. Potions was Thursday morning, and the dungeons were cold, and Severus Snape arrived like weather. Harry had read about Snape, not through the spheres, which were silent on individual people living in Harry's own time, but through the general framework of magical history that gave him context for the kind of wizard Snape was, brilliant, technically precise, operating from a framework of potion craft and defensive magic so thoroughly internalized that it had become the skeleton of his personality. He was the kind of scholar who found people irritating primarily because they interrupted the work. Harry understood this, actually. He'd had a similar quality himself, in the early years of the Vault, before the Warden had specifically started giving him lessons in human interaction as a component of magical education. Magic is not independent of people, the Warden had said. You cannot understand one without understanding the other. Hermits make powerful mages and terrible ones. The power accumulates. The aim drifts. Snape's entrance was dramatic in the way of someone who has found that drama is an effective pedagogical tool, the door sweeping open at precisely the right moment, the robes, the measured pacing. Harry watched the performance with academic appreciation. Snape was good at this. The intimidation was calculated, calibrated, and largely effective. The class had gone appropriately quiet, sitting up straight, radiating the anxiety of first years confronting an unknown authority. "You are here," Snape said, from the front of the room, voice pitched low enough that everyone had to focus to hear it, to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making. "There will be no foolish wand-waving here." He moved between the benches with the ease of someone who knows a space precisely. "I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach." Silence. Then, directed at Harry with an abruptness that had the precision of a test, "Potter. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" The class went very still. Harry recognized the dynamic, Snape asking questions designed to be unanswerable by first-year students, establishing a hierarchy of knowledge by demonstrating its absence. "Draught of living death," Harry said. "A powerful sleeping potion. Asphodel is a member of the lily family. The powdering is important because the cell wall needs to be broken before the compounds release correctly. The infusion temperature matters too. Too hot and the wormwood compounds denature." A pause. Brief but perceptible. "Where would you look?" Snape said, adjusting his approach with the fluidity of an intelligent person encountering an unexpected obstacle, "if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat. It neutralizes most poisons. It's a calcium carbonate and organic compound formation. More effective against organic poisons than synthetic ones. A broadly reliable antidote for general poisoning situations when you don't have time to identify the specific agent. Another pause. Longer. Snape's black eyes were on Harry with an expression that was not the contempt he'd been deploying at the start of class and not yet anything that could be called respect but was something in between, the look of a man rapidly revising his assumptions and not entirely happy about having them revised. "What is the difference," he said, quieter now, almost conversational, "between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant. Aconitum. Also called aconite. Extremely toxic, the alkaloids interfere with sodium channels in nerve cells. In potions, the difference in nomenclature usually indicates the form. Monkshood typically refers to the dried root preparation, wolfsbane to the fresh plant, though it's not a universal distinction. The important thing is that both are lethal in excess and both are significantly more complex in potion interaction than their surface classification suggests. The class was very quiet. Hermione had her hand up and had had it up since the first question, and Harry had a feeling she was experiencing something complex about the current situation. Snape looked at Harry for a long, measured moment. The dungeon fire crackled. Someone's cauldron shifted on its stand. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, in the tone of someone paying a debt they find mildly offensive. He turned to the board. "Open your copies of Magical Drafts and Potions to page 17. Today we brew a simple boil cure potion. The instructions are on the board. Follow them precisely." He moved away and began circling the room, and Harry opened his potions book, and Ron leaned over from the next bench and whispered, "How do you know all that?" "Read it," Harry said. "Nobody reads it like that." "I read it like that," Harry said, unstoppering his vials. He brewed the boil cure potion methodically and correctly, not because he was trying to impress anyone but because correct methodology was interesting in itself, the way the porcupine quills had to be added after removing from heat or the whole thing destabilized, the way the color change at the final stage told you exactly where you were in the chemical process. It was like breath casting, in a way. Every step connected to the next by logic. If you understood why, the how followed naturally. Snape came to stand behind him about midway through the brewing, looking over his shoulder. Harry didn't turn around. He stirred counterclockwise exactly 5 times, let the potion settle, watched the color shift. "Your heat's too high," Snape said. Harry looked at the flame, checked his potion's consistency against the description, looked at the ambient temperature in the room. "The dungeon's 6 degrees cooler than the textbook assumes," he said. "Standard conditions. I'm compensating." Silence behind him. The potion was a perfect pale pink. "That," Snape said finally, "is an adjustment that third years rarely make." "The textbook should probably mention it," Harry said. He heard Snape move away. If the man made any further comment, it was not audible. The troll happened on Halloween. Harry knew it was coming about 45 seconds before it arrived, which was enough time to do something useful with the information. The feast had been going for 2 hours and Harry had been enjoying it. The Great Hall at Halloween was extraordinary, the ceiling full of actual bats and the jack-o'-lanterns casting everything in amber and orange, and the food was its usual excess. He'd been in a comfortable conversation with Neville about the properties of Devil's Snare when he felt it, the way you feel weather coming, a disruption in the ambient magic of the castle, something heavy and dim-minded moving through corridors it shouldn't be in, something large. Then Quirrell ran into the hall and fainted, and the systematic panic began. Harry was already standing when the teachers started moving. Dumbledore was directing students to their dormitories. McGonagall was counting heads. The other teachers were filtering out toward the corridors. In the commotion Harry said, very quietly, to Ron and Neville, "Hermione didn't come to the feast tonight. She's been in the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor since this afternoon." Ron's face went through several things in rapid succession. "How do you know she's?" "Because she was upset about something Weasley said on the way to Charms and she went to the bathroom and didn't come out. And a 12-foot mountain troll is now somewhere in the castle." He was already moving toward the door. "2nd floor. Come on." They went through the crowd in the opposite direction of everyone else, which was easy because everyone else was moving toward the dormitories and Harry was moving with purpose, and people move for purpose without noticing they were doing it. Ron caught up, and Neville, who had taken approximately 2 seconds to make his decision and had apparently decided that wherever Harry was going was where he was going, came behind. The second-floor corridor smelled wrong already. Not the troll itself. Trolls smelled of damp stone and something that was not quite animal and not quite vegetable and was somehow worse than both. It was the smell of something large and very old and very stupid moving through a space that was not designed to contain it. Harry tracked it the way the Warden had taught him to track disrupted magic, not with his eyes but with the particular sensitivity in his hands and the back of his neck that had nothing to do with standard magical theory and everything to do with 6 years of primal training. He reached the girls' bathroom first. Pushed the door open. Hermione was backed against the far wall behind a sink, eyes wide, not making a sound. She'd had the presence of mind not to scream, which Harry noted with approval. The troll was between them, filling most of the available space, enormous and stinking and currently occupied with methodically destroying the row of sinks nearest the door with a large wooden club, apparently finding the crashing noise interesting. Harry walked in. The troll turned. Small red eyes found him, the slow, uncertain tracking of something that understood territory and threat only in the most basic terms. Harry looked at it. This was not a malicious creature. It was a lost one, taken from wherever trolls came from. The spheres had been clear on this. Mountain trolls were essentially ambulatory territorial mammals with limited magical sensitivity and no capacity for complex intent, disoriented by the smell and the noise and the magic-dense environment of the castle, reacting to its own confusion with the only tool it had, which was hitting things. Understanding that changed nothing about the practical situation but changed the quality of Harry's response. He didn't reach for his wand. He stood in the doorway and let his awareness move outward the way it moved in the vault, not aggressively, not as an attack, but as a presence, the way a light in a dark room is a presence. The primal quality of it, sourceless and warm and genuinely deep, moving through the cramped bathroom and reaching the troll the way warmth reaches cold stone. The troll stopped. Its small eyes moved between Harry and Hermione and the door. Its club was raised. It stood there, uncertain, the aggression draining out of it in the particular way that aggression drains when the adrenaline has nothing to push against, like a wave that reaches shore and finds not resistance but absorption. Harry stepped aside from the doorway. The troll looked at the open corridor. Looked at Harry. Made a sound that was low and confused and not hostile. Then it walked out of the bathroom, through the doorway, Harry pressing himself against the wall to give it room, which was pragmatic rather than frightened, and into the corridor, and lumbered away in the direction it had come from. The bathroom was very quiet. Hermione had both hands flat on the wall behind her. Her face was white and she was breathing carefully through her nose. Ron and Neville were in the doorway, both wearing identical expressions of someone who has processed an event and is not yet sure what filing category it belongs in. "Are you all right?" Harry said. Hermione looked at him. Her voice, when it came, was admirably level. "You didn't use your wand." "No. You just stood there." "More or less." "And it left." "Yes." A long pause. Then Hermione looked at Ron, who shrugged. Then at Neville, who said, quietly and with conviction, "He does that. You get used to it." "It's been 2 weeks," Ron said, as though this explained something. Hermione pushed herself off the wall and straightened her robes and did the thing Harry was learning was her response to extraordinary events. She processed them as information, filed them under the relevant internal category, and adjusted her model. It took her approximately 30 seconds. "The teachers will come to check," she said. "When they don't find the troll, they'll come this way. We should have a story." "The truth is fine," Harry said. "The truth involves you walking up to a mountain troll and staring at it until it left," Hermione said. "Yes. They won't believe that." "They might not, but it happened." "I don't see the value of an alternative account." He looked at her steadily. The truth is generally more useful than the lie that replaces it. Even when the truth is inconvenient. She studied him. The look she was developing, a specific, focused attention that meant she was genuinely thinking and not just processing, was directed at him fully now. "Fine," she said. "The truth." McGonagall arrived 4 minutes later, trailing Snape and Professor Flitwick. She took in the destroyed sinks, the 4 first years, the absence of Troll, and said, in a voice of remarkable restraint, "Explain." Harry explained. Completely and accurately, including the part about tracking Hermione's location, which he described as "I knew she hadn't come to the feast," which was true if not complete. McGonagall listened. Her expression moved through several stages. "And the Troll simply left. I gave it a way out," Harry said. "It took it." The silence in the bathroom had a specific texture. Snape, behind McGonagall, was looking at Harry with an expression that was unreadable, which was different from his usual expressions and therefore significant. Flitwick was looking at the space where the Troll had stood and then at the doorway and then back at Harry with an expression that was trying to be professional and was actually fascinated. 5 points to Gryffindor, McGonagall said finally, in the voice of someone issuing a ruling that she knows is inadequate to the situation but is the appropriate procedural response. For Miss Granger, for not panicking. A pause. And 10 points to Mr. Potter, for, another pause, longer, for creative problem solving. She looked at the 4 of them with the expression of someone who wants to ask several more questions and has decided that now is not the time. "Go to your dormitories." Harry went. Behind him he heard Snape say something very quietly to Flitwick, and Flitwick's response, equally quiet, and he caught only one word, "remarkable." He kept walking. The conversation with Dumbledore happened on a Saturday 3 weeks later, which was enough time for the Troll incident to have percolated through the school in the particular way that stories percolate, expanding slightly with each retelling, the details softening into legend. By the time it reached the version circulating among the older students, Harry had apparently stopped the Troll single-handedly using wandless magic that nobody could describe precisely. This was more accurate than most legends. Dumbledore's office was everything the spheres had suggested and somewhat more: the portraits, the instruments, the specific quality of accumulated attention that came from decades of a very powerful wizard using a space as his primary working environment, the magic pressing into the walls the way smoke presses into fabric. And Fawkes, on his perch near the window, burning with a slow, steady intensity that was the most genuinely primal thing Harry had felt since the castle foundations. He looked at the phoenix for a moment, and the phoenix looked back with one bright eye, and the quality of that exchange was a significant amount more mutual than most people's experience of looking at animals. Dumbledore was behind his desk, and he gestured Harry to the chair across from it with the manner of someone who has arranged a meeting they are not entirely sure how to conduct, which Harry found interesting because Dumbledore was not, generally, a person who was unsure how to conduct things. "Sit down, Harry," he said. First name basis, warm but measured. Harry sat. He looked at the headmaster across the desk, the half-moon spectacles, the long silver beard, the blue eyes that had the quality of water at great depth, still at the surface but moving below. "I've been looking forward to this conversation," Dumbledore said. "I hope you don't mind." "I've been looking forward to it too," Harry said honestly. Dumbledore seemed to find this answer slightly surprising, which told Harry something useful. "I wanted to speak with you about your experiences so far at Hogwarts. How are you finding it?" "The teaching is excellent," Harry said. "The institutional magic of the building is extraordinary. The food is very good. The social dynamics are interesting." Dumbledore smiled at that, a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "And your classes specifically?" "Charms is intuitive. Transfiguration is the most technically demanding. Potions is," he considered, "well taught. Professor Snape is precise. I respect that." "Professor Snape finds you unusual," Dumbledore said, in the tone of someone making an understatement they are aware is an understatement. "Most people do," Harry said. A pause. Harry, Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. I would like to speak to you about the incident on Halloween. Not to question your account of it, I believe you entirely. I am more interested in how you did what you did. I redirected its attention and gave it an exit, Harry said. Without a wand. Without an incantation. Using a quality of, Dumbledore seemed to be selecting his words with unusual care, presence. Something I have not seen in a student in a very long time. In fact, he stopped. In fact, not in a student at all. He was looking at Harry the way Ollivander had looked at him, not the assessment of power, but the assessment of kind. Of category. Trying to determine what species of thing he was looking at. I've had an unusual education, Harry said. Yes. I had gathered that. Dumbledore took his glasses off and polished them, which Harry read as a thinking gesture rather than a practical one. May I ask where? Harry sat with the question. He had thought about this conversation, had known it was coming, had considered what to say, had decided some time ago that the answer was the truth. Not all of it, not the detail, but the shape. The same logic he'd used with McGonagall. There's a space, Harry said, that I found when I was 5. Old space. It's been there a very long time. There was a great deal of knowledge in it, and I had 6 years to learn from it. What kind of space? The kind that predates Hogwarts, Harry said. Dumbledore was very still. The office instruments ticked quietly. Fawkes shifted on his perch. Predates, he began. By quite a margin, Harry said. And the knowledge in it. The kind of magic you demonstrated on Halloween. Dumbledore set his glasses down without putting them back on, the quality of what the Sorting Hat reported to me afterwards. Is this connected to that space? Yes. And this space? Can you tell me where it is? Harry looked at Dumbledore steadily. This was the important part, not adversarial, not defiant, but honest. No, he said. It's not mine to share. The access is specific. It doesn't work like that. The quality of Dumbledore's expression was complex and controlled. He was not used to being told no by 11-year-olds. He was not used to being told no by many people at all, and he was managing his response to it with visible effort, not anger, but something adjacent to unsettlement. I see, he said. It's not a lack of trust, Harry said. Or not entirely. It's more that what's in there, the knowledge, the structure of it, it belongs to the person who left it and to the person who found it. Sharing it in the way you'd need to understand it would require a kind of preparation that isn't possible through description. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You are very precise, he said finally. I try to be. It is not, Dumbledore seemed to make a decision. It is not a quality I associate with 11-year-olds. I haven't had a very 11-year-old sort of life, Harry said. The honesty in that landed in the room with a particular weight. Dumbledore's expression shifted, not to pity, which Harry would not have welcomed, but to something more genuine. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of someone who knows that childhoods can be extraordinary in the wrong ways and that the thing that comes out the other end is sometimes extraordinary in other ways as a consequence. No, Dumbledore said quietly. I don't suppose you have. They sat in a silence that was, Harry thought, the most honest kind, not the absence of conversation but the presence of something that didn't need words to exist. I want to help you, Dumbledore said finally. Whatever you're carrying, whatever was in that space, I want you to know that you don't have to carry it alone. Harry considered the headmaster. He thought about what was true, and what he could say, and where the line between the two was. I know, he said. And I appreciate that. But I've never been alone in it, really. The preparation was thorough. Thorough, Dumbledore repeated. Very. Dumbledore looked at the desk for a moment. Then he looked up, and he was smiling again, the genuine one. Then I will simply say this, my door is open. Always. And that, whatever you found, whatever you've learned, this castle has been waiting for someone like you for a very long time. It told me so, in its way. I know, Harry said. I felt it, coming across the lake. Dumbledore went very still again. Harry stood up. I should get back. I promised Neville I'd help him with his herbology notes. Of course, Dumbledore said. He sounded slightly, not smaller, that wasn't right. But perhaps less entirely certain of the dimensions of the room than he'd been when Harry entered it. Good afternoon, Harry. Good afternoon, Professor. Harry walked to the door, and stopped, and turned back. The Phoenix, he said, nodding toward Fawkes. She's been watching me since I came in. Dumbledore corrected, with a slight smile. She, Harry said gently. She doesn't mind what you call her, but she wanted me to mention it. He paused, watching Dumbledore's expression move through several stages quickly. She's been carrying a misidentification for about 60 years. She found it charming at first. It's wearing thin. He walked out. Behind him, there was a long silence, and then the sound of Fawkes singing, a short, clear, unmistakably satisfied note. Chapter 4, The language underneath. November arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did, sideways. Wind off the lake, rain that came in horizontal sheets, the castle settling into its winter configuration with the particular institutional comfort of a place that had weathered 900 Novembers and found them all manageable. The corridors were colder. The common room fires burned higher. Quidditch practice became a test of character, and the Slytherin and Gryffindor Quidditch captains both developed the haunted expressions of people managing too many variables in bad conditions. Harry had been made Seeker in his third week, which was against the rules and which McGonagall had pushed through with the focused energy of someone who had decided that rules existed for situations this particular situation was clearly not analogous to. He'd gone to his first practice, listened to Oliver Wood's tactical briefing with genuine interest, flown for the first time, and discovered that flying was the closest physical experience to what breath-casting felt like, that specific sensation of intention meeting resistance and winning, of your body moving through space in response to your will rather than the world's gravity. He was a natural, obviously. He was a natural at most things he tried, not because he was exceptional in some ineffable way but because 6 years of training had given him an unusual relationship with attention. He focused completely, learned quickly, and adjusted in real time, which was approximately 80% of what most skills required. Wood had watched his first practice with the expression of a man who has prayed for something and received it and is slightly afraid the universe has made a clerical error. But flying was a pleasure, not a priority. The priority, in November, was Quirrell. Harry had been watching him since the feast, cataloguing with the systematic patience of someone who had learned to trust his own perceptions over other people's reassurances. The resonance he'd felt then, that doubled quality, that wrong note chord buried in the man's magical signature, hadn't faded. It had clarified. Like a photograph developing, the picture resolving slowly into something he could name. There were two distinct magical signatures occupying Quirrell's space. One was Quirrell's own, weak, scattered, the magic of a scholar who had never pushed past his theoretical phase into genuine practice. The other was underneath it, the way the old Primal signature was underneath the Gringotts stonework, older, darker, and using Quirrell's body the way a hand uses a glove. Present but contained. Waiting. Harry knew what waiting felt like. He recognized it. He said nothing yet. He had learned, through the spheres and through 6 years of the Warden's patient instruction, that premature action was how you turned a solvable problem into an urgent one. You watched. You understood the complete picture. You moved when moving was the right thing to do, not simply when the urgency became uncomfortable. He told Hermione he was working on something in the library. She looked at him from across the Gryffindor table with the expression she'd developed for situations where she suspected he was understating things considerably. Something like what? Historical research, Harry said. On what subject? Old magic. The kind that predates standard classification. Her eyes sharpened immediately. She had an instinct for this kind of thing, the way a hunting dog reads the wind, not because it's been trained but because it's built for exactly this. Related to what you've been doing with Neville? Adjacent, Harry said. She closed her book. I'm coming. I thought you might, Harry said. The library was Hermione's natural habitat in the way the lake was the giant squid's. She moved through it with a comfortable authority that the space itself seemed to acknowledge, Madame Pants watching her with the cautious respect she extended to people who treated books as important. Harry moved through it differently, not with authority but with attention, the way you move through somewhere you're learning rather than somewhere you already know. They found the section he was looking for in the back of the restricted area, which Harry accessed by the straightforward method of walking past the rope barrier as though it wasn't there, which functioned because confidence, he'd found, was frequently more effective than permission. Hermione made a sound. You're just going to, the rope is symbolic, Harry said. A deterrent. It has no actual magical enforcement. That's not the point is you need a teacher's note. If Madame Pants stops us, I'll explain, Harry said. Come on. Hermione made another sound but she was already following, because Hermione Granger's intellectual curiosity, when engaged, was significantly more powerful than her rule-compliance instinct, and whatever Harry was looking for in the restricted section was clearly more interesting than waiting for a note. The books back here were older, and Harry could feel that immediately, the same kind of concentrated age quality that clung to the vault's walls, here expressed as the slow, heavy resonance of preserved magical text, each book carrying the accumulated intent of whoever had written it, the magic soaked into the parchment over decades and centuries. He ran his fingers along the spines, feeling rather than reading, until he found what he was looking for, 3 volumes, bound in something that was not quite leather, shelved in the furthest corner. Primal Workings, A Theoretical History, by Albrecht of Bruges, 1203. On the Matter of Unclassified Magic, Anonymous, approximately 14th century. The Language Before Words, by M. No date. He took all 3 to a table and sat down. Hermione sat across from him and looked at the books with the expression of someone who has walked into a room and discovered it is larger than the outside suggested. She reached for On the Matter of Unclassified Magic with the careful reverence of a person who understands old books, and opened it, and read the first page, and looked up. This is about the same kind of magic yes. It predates the International Statute of Secrecy by 3 centuries. The classification systems it's using are completely different from modern magical taxonomy. She was already turning pages, her eyes moving fast. Harry, why isn't this on a reading list? Because most people who teach here don't know it exists, Harry said. And because what's in here doesn't fit the framework they use to teach magic. It would require rebuilding the curriculum from the foundations, and institutions don't do that unless forced. She stopped on a page and read for a moment. That's a massive problem. If this is accurate, then half of what we're taught about the nature of magical energy is, it's not wrong, exactly, but it's incomplete, Harry said. Like Waffling's theorem. Exactly like Waffling's theorem. He opened the Language Before Words, the one attributed to M, which he had a strong intuition about, and felt immediately the particular resonance he'd expected. The text was not in English, not in Latin, not in any language that had a modern descendant. It was in something older, and he could read it the way he'd learned to read it through the spheres, not translation exactly, more like remembering something he'd always known. This one is more interesting. Hermione leaned over to look at it and made an expression. I can't read that. I know. I can. She sat back and looked at him. Of course you can, she said, in the tone she developed for these moments, not quite exasperation and not quite admiration, something in between that had become its own category. Is it relevant to whatever you're actually investigating? Because I know this isn't purely academic. Harry looked up from the book. I'm trying to understand something I noticed about someone. Someone in the castle. Yes. She waited. Harry had learned that Hermione's waiting had quality. She didn't fill silence impatiently, she held it deliberately, giving it space to become something. There's a professor, he said carefully, whose magical signature doesn't match their presentation. Hermione went very still. Doesn't match how? It's doubled. 2 signatures in one body. One is theirs. The other is something else, and it's much older, and it's not dormant. He paused. I'm trying to understand the mechanism. Whether it's possession in the classical sense or something more complex. The distinction matters for what should be done about it. Hermione stared at him. Which professor? I'd rather not say until I'm sure. You're already fairly sure, she said, reading him accurately. I'm sure of what I feel. I want to understand what it means before I act on it. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to do anything with this information. I'm telling you because you'll notice it yourself eventually, you notice everything, and I'd rather you have context when you do. She was quiet for a moment, processing. And the books are, what, confirmation? Background? The language before words describes a specific type of magical inhabitation that predates what modern wizards call possession. The classical possession model is forcible, one consciousness dominating another. What this describes is, he looked at the text, more like a graft. Something that has attached itself to a willing host, partly because it had no other option, and partly because the host made an agreement they may not have fully understood the terms of. That sounds worse than possession, Hermione said. In some ways. In others, it's more fragile. He turned a page. It requires a specific kind of ongoing consent from the host, not conscious, but structural. The host's own magic has to continue not rejecting the other signature. If the host's magic becomes sufficiently disrupted, the graft fails. How do you disrupt it? Harry smiled slightly. That's what I'm working out. They stayed in the restricted section for 2 more hours. Hermione read Albrecht of Bruges with the focused speed of someone mining a text for structural logic, occasionally reading passages aloud for discussion with the air of someone who has found a lecture partner willing to engage at full capacity. Harry read the language before words and found 3 chapters that were directly relevant and 1 passage that answered a question he'd been sitting with since September. When Madame Pants came to tell them the library was closing in 10 minutes, she looked at the books spread across their table, looked at Harry, and said only, restricted section materials are to be returned to their shelves in the condition they were found. Then she walked away without asking for the note. How? Hermione said, watching her go. The same way things generally work, Harry said, stacking books. Which is? When you treat something seriously, it tends to respond in kind. The morning he'd promised to help Neville had come 3 weeks ago, and what had begun as study assistance had become something else over the intervening weeks, something Harry hadn't planned but had recognized, when it happened, as the right thing to do. It started simply. Neville struggling with his wand work, not because his wand was wrong for him, it was slightly mismatched but functional, but because he was fighting the magic every time he tried to use it. Expecting to fail. Using the incantation as a kind of plea rather than an instruction. The magic heard him, and it responded the way things respond to uncertainty, hesitantly, incompletely. Harry had watched him struggle through 3 failed attempts at a switching spell and said, "Put the wand down." Neville had looked at him as though he'd suggested something physically dangerous. What? Just put it on the table for a moment. Neville set the wand down with the careful relief of someone setting down something that keeps burning their hand. Harry sat across from him and said, "Close your eyes." "This feels like divination," Neville said nervously. "It's nothing like divination." "Close your eyes." Harry waited. "Now. You like herbology?" "Yes." "When you're in the greenhouse and you're doing something you know how to do, repotting, pruning, taking a cutting, what does that feel like?" "In your hands." Neville was quiet for a moment. His face shifted, the anxiety draining slightly. "Warm," he said. Like the plant is talking back, almost." "I know that sounds, it doesn't sound odd," Harry said. "It sounds accurate." What you're feeling is the magic in the plant responding to the magic in you. It's automatic because you're not thinking about it. You're just doing it. He paused. When you pick up the wand, you stop doing what you naturally do and start doing something you think you're supposed to do, which is different. The magic feels the difference. Neville opened his eyes. So, the wand is a tool. It amplifies and directs. But the source, the thing that actually makes it work, is the same thing that makes you good with plants. You're not missing it. It's there. You're just getting in its way. Neville looked at him steadily. How do you know this? Because I've been doing magic without a wand since I was 6 and I've spent a long time thinking about what the actual mechanism is. Harry met his gaze. I'm going to teach you something. Not instead of standard spell work, alongside it. A way of working with your magic before you express it through the wand. It should help. What kind of something? How to breathe. Neville blinked. I know how to breathe. You know how to breathe accidentally, Harry said. I'm going to show you how to do it on purpose. Neville had the good judgment to simply say, okay. They worked on it for an hour that first session. Not with spells, not with the wand, just with breathing, with attention, with the foundational exercise the Warden had given Harry at age 5. He'd adapted it slightly, simplified it, stripped out the elements that required context he hadn't given Neville yet. But the core of it, breath as intention, intention as direction, direction as the necessary precondition for any magic regardless of method, translated cleanly. By the end of that first hour, Neville could hold a candle flame steady that he'd previously been making gutter and die. He stared at it for a long moment in the empty classroom with an expression that Harry recognized, the full expression, the one that meant something that had been empty was receiving its first measure. Oh, Neville said softly. Yeah, Harry said. After that, they met twice a week in an unused classroom off the third-floor corridor that Harry had identified in the first week as useful, well away from the main traffic, good acoustics, a window that caught the afternoon light in a way that was genuinely pleasant to work in. Hermione started coming. Then Ron, who had arrived for the third session and sat in the corner watching for 20 minutes before saying all right, fine, teach me that breathing thing too, in the tone of someone surrendering to inevitability. Harry had not intended to teach anyone anything. He hadn't designed a curriculum or thought about pedagogy. But these 3 people were, they were his, in the particular way that people become yours when you've chosen them without strategic intent, just because of who they were. And what he had, the foundation, the breathing, the pre-wand attention work, was genuinely useful, and sharing it was natural. He was careful. He shared the method, not the source. He did not talk about the vault, not directly, not yet. He taught them the way the Warden had taught him, through doing, through experience, through showing, because the Warden had been right that the most important things couldn't be transmitted through explanation. By November, Neville was performing switching spells at the level of a third-year student. He hadn't told his grandmother. Harry suspected he was saving it, the way you save a good card, for the right moment. Hermione was using the breathing work as a foundation for her already excellent wand magic and producing results that were causing Flitwick to check his own textbooks. Ron was applying it selectively and inconsistently with the particular pattern of someone who is better at things than he believes he is and requires external evidence to accept his own results. Harry watched them all, and felt something that was warm and specific and that he eventually identified, with a slight surprise, as pride. Not in himself. In them. He found the research trail on a Wednesday. He'd gone to the library alone, it was late, past the theoretical closing time, the castle settling into its night configuration with the familiar sounds of old stone adjusting to temperature. Harry had the particular late-night library access that comes from being someone the castle itself has decided to accommodate, which manifested practically as Madame Pants not locking the back door if Harry was still inside at closing time. He was pulling the last relevant passages from Albrecht of Bruges when he noticed it. The book had been used. Recently, not just recently in the sense of the last decade, but recently. The spell residue in the pages had a freshness to it, the magical equivalent of a coffee cup still warm. Someone had gone through this book, specifically these chapters, within the last 2 months. He looked closer. Not a student, the magical signature was adult, trained, deliberate. Someone who knew what they were looking for and had gone to it directly rather than reading sequentially. The residue had the quality of urgency, not academic curiosity. Someone conducting research under pressure. He checked the other 2 books from the restricted section. The anonymous 14th century text had similar residue. Less fresh but present, mid-September, Harry estimated, which was roughly the start of term. The language before words had residue going back to last year, repeated visits, each one more focused than the last. The signature in the language before words was particularly interesting because it had a quality of hunger. Intense, unsatisfied, the magical fingerprint of someone who had been close to an answer and couldn't quite reach it. He sat at the library table in the dark with the 3 old books and thought about this. The obvious conclusion was quarrel. The timing fit, start of term, the doubled signature present in him from Harry's first observation, the increasing quality of something waiting in those underneath layers. But the research pattern didn't fit Quirrell's profile. Quirrell's own magic was weak and scattered. The signature in these books was focused, precise, capable of extracting very specific information from very dense magical text. The other signature. Not Quirrell reading. The other presence using Quirrell's hands. Harry sat with this. The presence in Quirrell was researching primal magic. Had been researching it since before term started, possibly for much longer. Looking for something specific. Going deeper and deeper into the oldest available sources and not quite finding it. He thought about what the Warden had told him about Voldemort. He hadn't asked directly, hadn't needed to, because the spheres contained context about the last century of magical history, and Voldemort's trajectory was visible in that context the way a comet's path was visible in the pattern of disturbed space around it. A wizard who had gone further than any living person in the study of ancient magic, further and faster and more obsessively than anyone since Merlin, and then something had happened, and whatever he'd found or almost found at the end of that obsessive pursuit had cost him everything. Left him as less than a ghost. Requiring a host. A wizard who had spent decades chasing the oldest magic was now in his castle, in his defense teacher, reading the same books Harry was reading. He closed Albrecht of Bruges and sat in the dark library and thought about what to do with this. The answer was, nothing yet. Watch. Understand. He needed to know what Voldemort was looking for specifically, because that would tell him what kind of threat this was and what kind of response it warranted. If Voldemort was looking for what Harry thought he was looking for, the primal foundation, the root of everything, then he was looking for something he could not access, because the access was specific, and Harry had it, and Harry was not going to give it. But there was something else he needed to know. He went back to the library shelves, to a different section this time, not the restricted area, but the general magical history section. He found what he was looking for in the 4th shelf from the bottom, notable magical objects of the medieval period, which was pedestrian enough to not attract attention and comprehensive enough to be useful. He found the chapter on the Philosopher's Stone in 12 minutes. He read it standing up, in the dark, by the ambient light from the nearest window. Nicholas Flamel. The stone's properties. Elixir of life. And, buried in a footnote that most people reading for the main text would skip over, a passing reference to the stone's primal resonance, a note from the scholar who had actually examined the stone in 1671, who had written, in the archaic English of the period, that the stone seemed to breathe in the hand, that it had the quality of something alive rather than manufactured, and that it responded to the holder's fundamental magical nature in a way that suggested its properties were not simply chemical but intentional. Harry read that footnote 3 times. Then he put the book back and walked out of the library and down the dark corridor, and the castle walked with him in its way, the stones warm underfoot, the ambient magic adjusting around him like water around a stone, and he thought about the stone and what Voldemort needed it for and why the stone was at Hogwarts and who had put it there. He thought about Dumbledore. He thought about the third-floor corridor, which he had not yet visited, which he was very well aware existed, which he had been deliberately leaving for the appropriate moment. He thought about the word appropriate and what it meant in the context of everything he now knew. He went back to Gryffindor Tower, and he sat on his bed in the dark dormitory with Ron snoring gently 4 feet away and Neville making his usual collection of small sleep sounds, and he breathed slowly and let his awareness move outward through the castle the way he'd learned to do, feeling the shape of it. He found the third-floor corridor. He felt what was inside it, past the locked door, past whatever Dumbledore had put there as a deterrent, down past the layers of protective magic that were actually quite impressive and which he had no doubt would stop most people effectively. Past all of that, at the bottom, the specific signature he'd read about in the library. The stone breathed. It was faint, distant, muffled by layers of enchantment. But unmistakably there. Unmistakably primal. Not the same frequency as his own magic, not the same root as the vault's underlying quality, but the same family, the same ancestral signature. Something made by someone who had understood, at the foundational level, what magic was before it became what most people thought it was. He let the awareness come back. He lay down on his bed. "Are you awake?" said Neville, from the next bed, which Harry had not expected. "Yes," Harry said. "I couldn't sleep." A pause. "Are you all right?" "I'm working something out," Harry said. "Something complicated?" "Yes." "Do you need to talk about it?" Neville asked. The way he asked it was, careful. Genuinely offering, not pressing. Harry considered. "Not yet. But I will, soon." He paused. "Are you all right?" "The switching spell today, I did it," Neville said, with a quality of quiet wonder in his voice that Harry found genuinely moving. "First try. 3 times in a row." "I know. I saw. I didn't tell you, but Gran's written to say she wants to know how my practical marks are coming because she'd heard the first assessments were." He stopped. "She's coming for the Hogsmeade weekend in December. I want her to see." "She'll see," Harry said. "You don't know that. You did a switching spell first try, 3 times in a row, 2 months after you thought you could barely manage Lumos," Harry said. "I know that." A silence. Then Neville said, softly, "Thank you. For all of it." "Go to sleep," Harry said. He heard Neville settle. Within 5 minutes the small sleep sounds resumed. Harry lay in the dark and thought about the stone and about Voldemort and about the research trail in the library books, and about the 3 people sleeping around him who had, without any of them particularly planning it, become the thing he trusted most in the world outside the vault. He thought about the Warden saying, "Power is loneliest when wielded alone," which the Warden had never actually said in those words, but which had been the implication of 100 conversations, threaded through the years like a seam in stone. He closed his eyes. He breathed in. He breathed out. The castle settled around him. The Ministry observer arrived on a Thursday in late November, which Harry thought was a very Ministry thing to do, arrive on a Thursday, when the week's momentum was established and the disruption would be maximum. Her name was Mafalda Hopkirk, which Harry knew from the spheres as the head of the improper use of magic office, and she arrived in the entrance hall with 2 junior officials and a clipboard and the expression of someone performing neutrality over considerable anxiety. She was small and precise and her robes were department standard and her magical signature was clean and organized, a bureaucratic caster, competent, careful, operating entirely within the scaffold framework of Ministry standard magic. She was afraid. Not of Harry specifically, she didn't know Harry specifically, not yet. She was afraid of the report. Harry had gathered, through the general information ecosystem of Hogwarts, that the Halloween troll incident had been documented in the Ministry's magical incident database and that the nature of the report, first-year student subdued mountain troll without wand or incantation, mechanism unclear, had triggered something in the Ministry's classification system. The improper use of magic office monitored underage magic. The Department of Mysteries monitored unclassifiable magic. These two departments had, apparently, generated a joint memo about Harry Potter that had risen through the hierarchy fast enough to cause concern. Hence Hopkirk. Harry found out about the visit from McGonagall, who called him to her office on Wednesday evening with the manner of someone delivering information they've decided to deliver directly rather than let him find out through other channels. He appreciated this about McGonagall. She was straight. "The Ministry is sending an observer tomorrow," she said. "Mafalda Hopkirk, from the improper use of magic office. She will be in the castle for 2 days, attending classes and," McGonagall's mouth thinned slightly, "observing you." "Because of the troll," Harry said. "Because of the troll, and because of certain anomalies in the monitoring charms that register underage magic usage. The charms have been flagging unusual readings in your vicinity since September." She looked at him steadily. "Harry. I want to give you the opportunity to tell me if there is anything I should know before tomorrow." Harry thought about what McGonagall was actually asking. She was asking, "Are you about to embarrass me?" Not from vanity, from the professional responsibility of someone who had put her institutional weight behind his seeker appointment and his sorting and his general presence in her house. "I am not going to do anything that will get Gryffindor in trouble," he said. "Or you." She held his gaze. "That's not quite what I asked." "I know." He met her eyes. "I can't promise I'll perform within the Ministry's classification framework, because I don't operate within the Ministry's classification framework. But I can promise I'll be honest, and I won't do anything reckless, and if Hopkirk has specific questions I'll answer them directly." McGonagall was quiet for a moment. "The headmaster is aware of the visit and has had discussions with the Ministry about appropriate scope. However," she paused, "the headmaster cannot entirely prevent the Ministry from escalating if they find reason to." "I understand," Harry said. "Do you?" She wasn't challenging. She was asking. "The Ministry classifies magic to control it," Harry said. "If my magic doesn't classify, the Ministry's primary tool for control doesn't work. That makes me a problem regardless of whether I've done anything wrong." He paused. "I've known this was coming since I was 8. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment in the quiet of her office, the fire crackling, the hour late, and said something that Harry hadn't expected. "Good. Professor. A student who understands the situation is better positioned to navigate it than one taken by surprise." She turned back to her desk. "Get some sleep, Potter." Hopkirk arrived the next morning, and Harry watched her arrive from the first-floor corridor window, and felt her anxiety from 40 feet away, and thought about what the Warden had said about deep water and what it contains. She observed his morning classes. She stood at the back of Transfiguration with her clipboard and watched McGonagall's class, and Harry performed a perfect switching spell on the first attempt without particularly drawing attention to it, and helped Neville quietly with his positioning when McGonagall's back was turned, and did nothing that could be described as unusual. She observed charms, where Flitwick was running them through Wingardium Leviosa practice, and Harry levitated his feather cleanly and helped Ron with his wrist movement, and Hopkirk wrote something on her clipboard. She observed lunch. At lunch, Ron leaned across the table and said, very quietly, "That woman hasn't stopped watching you." "I know," Harry said. "It's a bit weird." "She's doing her job," Harry said. "Let her do it." "Are you not at all bothered?" "I'm bothered," Harry said, honestly. "I just don't find being bothered useful at lunch." Hermione, on his other side, had been monitoring the situation with the precision of someone building a case file. "She's spoken to Professor Flitwick, Professor Sprout, and Professor Snape," she said quietly. "She hasn't spoken to Professor Quirrell yet." Harry went still. "You're sure?" "I've been watching her route." Hermione met his eyes. "Is that relevant?" "Possibly," Harry said. He picked up his fork. "Eat your lunch. I'll talk to you later." The confrontation, if it could be called that, which Harry thought was too strong a word for what was actually a polite conversation, came after dinner, in the entrance hall, when Hopkirk intercepted him with the manner of someone who had been working up to something for several hours. "Mr. Potter," she said. Her voice was careful and professional. "I wonder if I might have a word." "Of course," Harry said. He stopped walking. Gave her his full attention. She had her clipboard. She looked at it once, then seemed to decide she didn't need it, and looked at him instead. "I understand you're settling in well here." "Very well, thank you. Your professors speak highly of you." "That's kind of them." A pause. She was trying to find her angle. "Mr. Potter, I'm going to be direct with you." "Please," Harry said. "The monitoring charms that we use to detect underage magic usage have been flagging your address consistently since September. Not specific incidents, which would be normal for a student with an active magical education, but a general," she checked her clipboard, "ambient elevation of magical energy in your vicinity. A constant reading rather than event-specific peaks." "I understand," Harry said. "Can you explain that?" "The magic I practice is somewhat different from standard wand-cast magic," Harry said. "It's more integrated, less event-specific, more constant. I imagine that reads differently to a charm designed to detect discrete casting incidents." Hopkirk's pen stopped moving. "Different how?" "Older, mostly," Harry said. "Older in what sense?" "In the sense that it predates the classification systems your monitoring charms are calibrated to detect," Harry said, not unkindly. "I'm not trying to be evasive. It simply doesn't have a ministry category, which I understand is uncomfortable from a regulatory standpoint." Hopkirk looked at him. She was, Harry thought, a genuinely capable person, and the capability was currently doing battle with the institutional reflex to manage the unclassifiable by demanding it classify itself. "The underage magic restrictions," she began. "Prohibit minors from performing magic outside school," Harry said. "I haven't done that. Everything I've done magically since September has been within Hogwarts grounds." He paused. "What I did before September, during school holidays, doesn't fit the standard definition of performed magic. I can't switch it off. It's more like," he searched for the right word, "breathing. You can't ask someone to stop breathing while on holiday." The clipboard was very still in Hopkirk's hands. "That's not a category we have." "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry that's inconvenient." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're 11, she said finally, and the sentence had a strange quality, not accusatory, almost wondering. "Yes," Harry agreed. "You're also," she stopped. Looked at her clipboard. Looked back. "There are people in the Department of Mysteries who have been studying certain types of preclassification magic for a long time. There are concerns." "About me specifically?" "About what you represent," she said carefully. Harry nodded. "Tell them," he said, "that I'm not a threat. I'm a person. The two things are compatible." She wrote something on the clipboard. Then, with the air of someone deciding on a course of action, she said, "I'll be submitting my report on Saturday. I'll describe what I've observed as within normal parameters." "It is within normal parameters," Harry said. "It's within the parameters that are normal for what I do." Something almost like a smile moved through Hopkirk's careful expression. "Good night, Mr. Potter." "Good night, Miss Hopkirk," Harry said. She walked away toward the wing where the guest rooms were, and Harry watched her go, and turned back toward Gryffindor Tower. Ron was waiting at the top of the entrance hall stairs, arms crossed, trying to look casual and not achieving it. "That was the ministry official," Ron said. "Yes. She wanted to talk to you." "Yes. And you just talked to her." He fell into step beside Harry, moving up the stairs. "Like it was normal." "It was normal," Harry said. "She had concerns. I addressed them. The ministry had concerns about you and you just addressed them." Ron's voice had the quality of someone recounting an event they found both admirable and slightly unhinged. Harry. Yes. You're going to give my mother an absolute crisis when she hears about you. Why? Because she's going to want to adopt you, Ron said, completely seriously. I'm warning you now. She's going to want to adopt you and feed you, and it's going to be very hard to stop her. Harry laughed, the real, unguarded laugh, the one that still surprised him sometimes when it came. I think I can manage your mother, Ron. That's what everyone says, Ron said darkly, and nobody's managed it yet. They went upstairs, into the warm noise of the common room, where Hermione had established a small study camp near the fire and Neville was working through his herbology essay with the focused ease of someone whose relationship with the subject had recently become considerably less fraught. Harry sat down in the remaining chair, pulled out his transfiguration notes, and felt the warmth of the fire and the warmth of these people in the same space, and thought about the stone breathing in the deep vaults of the castle, and about the research trail in the library, and about Hopkirk saying what you represent. He knew what he represented. He'd known for a while now. The question was what to do about it. He opened his transfiguration notes and started working, and the common room moved around him with its comfortable evening noise, and the fire crackled, and outside the tower windows the November dark had settled over the castle grounds with the particular thickness of a night that has decided to be a night, the lake invisible, the forbidden forest a darker mass against the dark sky. Somewhere in the castle, deep down, the stone breathed. Harry breathed with it, very slightly, testing the resonance, feeling the shape of it. Soon, he thought. The fire answered. Chapter 5, Blood and Stone. December arrived and brought the snow with it. It came overnight, the way the best snowfalls do, the world going to sleep one color and waking up another, the castle grounds transformed into something that looked less like a school and more like a place from the kind of story where the landscape itself has opinions about events. The lake was iron-gray beneath it, the forbidden forest dark against all that white, the greenhouses steaming gently in the cold. Harry stood at the dormitory window at 6 in the morning and watched the grounds in the early light and felt the castle feel the snow the way living things feel weather, a settling, a deepening, the old stones exhaling slowly in the cold. He'd slept badly. Not from anxiety, which was not generally a condition he suffered from, but from the particular restlessness of someone in whom several converging things are approaching their natural conclusion and whose instincts are running ahead of the available information. The stone had been louder last night. Not in sound, it wasn't that kind of louder. It was the resonance, the breathing quality he'd been feeling since November, but clearer now, more insistent, the way a signal becomes clearer as you move toward the source. Something had changed in the third-floor corridor. Something in the configuration around the stone had shifted, and whatever the shift was, it had elevated the stone's ambient frequency enough that Harry had felt it through his sleep like a bass note through a floor. He dressed, went down to the common room, and found Hermione already there, sitting in the exact chair she'd been in when he'd left it at midnight, which suggested either she'd been there all night or she'd come back very early. Given that her book was open to a different page and she had the bright-eyed slightly frayed quality of someone who had slept but not quite enough, Harry concluded the latter. She looked up when he came down the stairs, and said without preamble, "It's Quirrell." "I know," Harry said. "He's been in the restricted section again. Madame Pants told me, she didn't mean to tell me, I asked about the Albrecht book and she mentioned it had been returned recently and the way she said it, Hermione stopped herself and reorganized. He's been in the restricted section 3 times this week. And he spent an hour in the corridor near the 3rd floor yesterday evening." Harry sat down across from her. The fire was low, the common room empty, it was too early for most people. He looked at her and thought, not for the first time, that Hermione Granger's intelligence was genuinely extraordinary, not because of its volume but because of its quality, the way it moved, the connections it made, the way it had been working on this problem without being given the full picture and had arrived at the correct conclusion from the outside. "Tell me what you've worked out," he said. She took a breath. "There's something on the 3rd floor that's being guarded. It's obvious, the locked door, the fact that Dumbledore specifically mentioned it in September, which was practically an invitation to think about it. Whatever it is, it's significant enough to require guarding but not significant enough to be kept somewhere more secure, which means Dumbledore has made a deliberate choice to keep it here. Possibly because here is actually the safest place, because Hogwarts itself is the protection. She paused. Quirrell is interested in it. You've been interested in it since at least November. The thing in Quirrell that isn't Quirrell is researching ancient magic in the restricted section. She looked at him steadily. What's in that corridor, Harry? The Philosopher's Stone, he said. She sat very still. Nicholas Flammel's, yes. And Quirrell, what's in Quirrell is Voldemort. She said the name without flinching, which Harry noted with appreciation. He wants the stone because, the elixir of life. A body. A return. Harry leaned forward. He's been a parasite for 10 years. Whatever he did to himself before he lost his body made a full resurrection impossible without external assistance. The stone is the only thing in existence that could give him what he needs. Hermione was quiet for a moment, processing with the focused speed he'd come to rely on. How close is he to getting it? I don't know, Harry said honestly. The protections are substantial. I've felt the configuration from here, and whatever Dumbledore built is genuinely impressive. But Voldemort has been studying the same foundational sources I have, and if he's intelligent enough, and he is, whatever else he is, he's brilliant, he may have found an approach that the protections weren't designed to anticipate. So what do we do? Harry looked at her. What do you think we should do? She recognized the question as genuine, not rhetorical. She thought about it properly, fingers laced together, eyes focused on the middle distance. We can't tell Dumbledore directly, because you've been investigating the same magical sources Voldemort has, and that'll raise questions about what you know and how you know it, and that's a conversation that could go badly depending on how Dumbledore decides to handle it. She paused. We can't alert the Ministry because the Ministry already has a file on you, and handing them evidence that you know who is alive and in your defense teacher will create a crisis that spirals beyond our control. Another pause. We need to understand exactly what's between Voldemort and the stone, and whether the protections will hold, and if they won't, we need to be in a position to do something about it before he gets there. Yes, Harry said. When? Soon, Harry said. I'll know when. She looked like she wanted to argue with this on procedural grounds, and then she looked at his face, and she didn't argue. All right, she said. What do you need from me? Keep watching Quirrell. If his pattern changes, if he moves toward the 3rd floor at an unusual time, find me immediately. He paused. And tell Ron and Neville. Are you sure? They're ours, Harry said. Simple and complete. They should know. Something moved through Hermione's expression that was warmer than her usual processing face. All right. He told Neville and Ron at breakfast, quietly, between the porridge and the toast, with the noise of the Great Hall providing its usual cover. He was concise: the stone, Quirrell, Voldemort, the likely timeline. He watched their faces as he talked, Ron going through surprise and alarm and then a rapid landing on all right, what do we do, and Neville going quieter and stiller and more focused in the particular way Harry had noticed meant his mind was running faster than his expression. When Harry finished, Ron said, Voldemort. Literally Voldemort. In the castle. In Quirrell, Harry said. Since September, Ron said. Possibly longer. And you knew since Halloween, roughly. I've been working out the complete picture since then. Ron sat with this for a moment. Then he said, with genuine curiosity rather than resentment, when were you going to tell us? When I knew what to tell you, Harry said. Which is now. Right, Ron said. He picked up his toast. Put it down. Picked it up again. Right. Okay. I don't want anyone doing anything alone, Harry said. Whatever happens when this comes to a head, we go together. Neville, who had been quiet through all of this, said, the troll on Halloween. That wasn't random, was it? Harry looked at him. No. I think it was a distraction, an attempt to clear the corridor while someone made a move on the third floor. It didn't work, Neville said. No. Because Voldemort is in a weak body and Quirrell's magic is scattered and whatever Dumbledore has guarding the stone held. Harry paused. It won't keep holding indefinitely. At some point, Quirrell is going to stop making probing attempts and simply commit. When that happens, the timeline compresses. Neville nodded slowly. Then he said something that surprised Harry. What does Voldemort want? I mean, really want. Not just the stone. The thing underneath. Harry looked at him. What made you ask that? Because if we understand what he actually is, not what he did, but what he became and why, then we understand the shape of the problem better. Neville was looking at him with those steady brown eyes. That's what you always do. You understand the shape before you decide what to do about it. Harry held Neville's gaze for a moment. He thought about the spheres, about the trajectory he'd read in the history of the last century, about a wizard who had gone so deep into the oldest magic and come back wrong, come back less. About power sought so desperately it had consumed the person seeking it. He found something, Harry said quietly. Years ago. The edge of the kind of magic that's genuinely old, the primal foundation. He got close enough to feel it. And he tried to grab it instead of growing toward it. He paused. It cost him everything. His body, his continuity, the essential human thing. He spent 10 years as almost nothing because he reached for something that has to be given, and he tried to take it. The table was quiet around them. Ron had put his toast down again. Can it be given back? Neville asked. The human thing. Can it be restored? Harry thought about this honestly. I don't know, he said. I don't know if what he is now has enough of the original person left to receive it. He paused. But I think that's the real tragedy. Not that he's evil. But that he destroyed the only version of himself that could have had what he was looking for. That's incredibly sad, Hermione said quietly. Yes, Harry agreed. It is. That doesn't make him less dangerous. The thing that moved the timeline was Snape. Or rather, it was what Harry noticed about Snape in the second week of December, the way the man moved through the castle in the evenings with the focused purpose of someone conducting surveillance rather than taking a walk, the way his magical signature had developed a particular taut quality like a string pulled slightly too tight, the way he'd been spending time in the third-floor corridor that Harry tracked through the castle's ambient awareness. Snape knew. Or suspected. Or had been watching Quirrell and arrived at a version of the same conclusion Harry had reached, through whatever different methodology Snape applied, and was doing what Snape did with dangerous information, holding it close, working alone, not trusting anyone with it until he had the complete picture. Harry found this, on reflection, both reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because Snape was not going to let Voldemort walk out of the castle with the stone if he could help it. Concerning because Snape working alone in this situation was the kind of variable that made planning difficult. He was thinking about this on a Saturday afternoon, sitting at the window of the unused classroom on the third floor, not the corridor end, the opposite end, looking out at the snow-covered grounds, when Quirrell walked past the door. Harry didn't move. The footsteps in the corridor were wrong. Not Quirrell's usual pattern, quick, slightly nervous, the shuffle of someone who has learned to make themselves small. These were deliberate. Each step placed with intention, the particular controlled gait of someone whose body is being directed rather than moving naturally. Not Quirrell walking. The other presence moving Quirrell's body with precision. Harry waited until the footsteps passed, then stood, moved to the corridor, and followed. He moved the way the vault had taught him to move, without the particular energetic signature that footsteps usually had, his presence not vanished but quieted, not invisible but not drawing attention. The castle helped, the way it always helped, the stones not quite amplifying sound in his direction. He followed Quirrell down the third-floor corridor, past the locked door, and watched. Quirrell stood in front of the door for almost a minute, completely still. Then he raised one hand and touched the lock, and Harry felt the quality of the magic that came from his hand, not Quirrell's scattered, weak magic, but the other signature, controlled and cold and very old. Working on the lock not with force but with understanding. The way Harry himself would have worked on it, from the inside out, finding the logic of the enchantment, negotiating rather than overriding. The lock held. But it held with effort. Harry could feel the strain, the protective magic flexing, resisting, but resisting against something that genuinely understood its structure. He's close, Harry thought. Very close. Then Quirrell turned around. He looked directly at the spot where Harry was standing. Harry didn't move, didn't react, didn't adjust his presence. He stood in the corridor 6 feet from Voldemort inside Quirrell's body, and the turban-wrapped head turned and those eyes, wrong eyes, the quality in them that was not Quirrell, looked directly at him with an attention that had nothing to do with seeing and everything to do with feeling. "Mr. Potter," said Quirrell's voice. Except it wasn't quite Quirrell's voice. It had a quality to it that Quirrell's voice didn't normally have, smoother, more deliberate, the diction of someone for whom precision of speech is as habitual as breathing. "I wondered when you'd find your way here." "I've known about the corridor since September," Harry said. "I know," Quirrell said, in that not quite Quirrell voice. "I felt you, then. On the lake. Something in the castle changed when you arrived. I noticed." "What did you notice?" Harry asked. Genuinely curious. "Something I hadn't felt in a very long time." The pause that followed had weight. "Something I once came very close to myself." Harry looked at Quirrell's face, at the surface of it, which was afraid, Quirrell was always afraid, and at the thing underneath, which was not afraid at all but was, and this surprised Harry more than it probably should have, interested. "You found it," Harry said. "The primal root. Before everything happened." "I found the edge of it," Quirrell said. And now the voice was different again, not smoother, but more real. Less performed. "I found enough to know what it was and what it could do, and I tried to," a pause that had a peculiar quality to it. "I made a fundamental error of approach." "You tried to own it," Harry said. "I tried to contain it," Quirrell's voice said. "There is a distinction. The effect is the same." A long silence in the third-floor corridor. Snow was falling outside the narrow window at the end, visible as a white blur against the gray sky. The locked door breathed behind Quirrell with the same rhythm Harry had been feeling from his dormitory, clearer now at close range. "You have it," said the voice. "Not a question. What I spent 50 years looking for. You have it, and you found it at, what, 5? 6. And you've had it for 6 years and you're 11 years old." Something moved through the quality of the voice that Harry couldn't categorize, not envy, not quite. Something older than envy. "Tell me. Was it given or found?" "Both," Harry said. "It had to be found to be given. And the one who left it, the vault, the anchor point in the southern counties," Harry went very still. "You know about the vault." "I have spent 50 years looking for it," Quirrell said. "I found references in 11 languages across 4 centuries. I found the location to within a quarter mile. I found the willow pattern in the old texts, the marker signatures." A pause. "I never found the door." "Because it wasn't for you," Harry said. "No." Something changed in the voice. Flattened. Became very quiet. "No. I understand that now." The head turned slightly, the wrong eyes looking at the locked door rather than at Harry. "What is on the other side of this door, Harry Potter?" "You know what's on the other side," Harry said. "You've been looking for it for months. I know what Dumbledore brought here. I know what Flamel made. I want to know if you've been inside." "Not yet," Harry said. "Honest. But you will." "Yes." Quirrell's body was very still. The snow outside the window thickened. Somewhere in the castle a clock struck the quarter hour with the slow certainty of something that has been marking time for a very long time and will continue marking it long after the things that care about time have finished with it. "I need the stone," Quirrell said. "No pretense now, no academic framing. Direct. You know why." "A body," Harry said. "The elixir. A return." The voice was, and Harry listened to this carefully, because the quality of it mattered more than the words, not demanding. Not threatening. It had the quality of something stating a truth about itself that it has stopped trying to conceal. What I am now is not sustainable. I have been, what I am now for 10 years, and I am aware, with perfect clarity, of what I have lost." A pause. "I am also aware that you are the only person in this castle who has any chance of understanding what I am describing." Harry looked at Quirrell's face, at the thing behind it, and thought about what Neville had asked at breakfast. What does he want? The thing underneath. He thought about the sphere he'd read at age 8, the one that carried Merlin's feeling of grief about the world moving away from something true. He thought about the difference between reaching and growing. "I understand what you lost," Harry said. "I don't think you can get it back from the stone." The elixir restores a body," Harry said. "It can't restore what you destroyed to get here. The human thing, the part that could have received what you were looking for. That's gone." He paused. "I don't say that to hurt you. I say it because I think you know it's true and you're pursuing the stone anyway because the alternative is accepting that there's no path back." The silence that followed this was different from the other silences. It was longer. And it had a quality that Harry did not know what to do with, something genuinely raw in it, something that had been the most powerful dark wizard of the century laid briefly bare in a cold school corridor, the strategic mind and the performing menace stripped away for just a moment, leaving something that might have been, a long time ago, a person who had wanted something real and had gone catastrophically wrong in the pursuit of it. Then it was gone, and the voice when it came back was not that. "Move aside," it said. "No," Harry said. The air in the corridor changed. Harry felt the magic gather around Quirrell's body the way storm clouds gather, the cold signature, powerful even in this diminished state, more powerful than anything Harry had encountered outside the vault. He felt it as pressure, as intent, as the particular quality of force aimed at a specific target. He stood where he was. He breathed in. He let his own magic, the primal core, 6 years of cultivation, the deep warm frequency that was entirely his, move outward. Not as an attack. Not as a shield. As a presence. The same presence he'd used in the troll bathroom, but deeper now, fuller, the way a river in flood is fuller than the same river in summer. It filled the corridor from wall to wall and ceiling to floor, sourceless and warm and genuinely ancient, and it met the cold force of Voldemort's gathered magic the way a warm current meets a cold one in deep water, not a collision but a conversation between incompatible temperatures. The cold magic faltered. Not because Harry overpowered it, though the comparison of raw force might have supported that conclusion. It faltered because of what the primal quality was, at its root, the magic of living things, of growth and breath and intention, the fundamental frequency of the world before anyone named it. And Voldemort's magic, powerful as it was built on the opposite principle, on extraction, on taking, on making the world serve the caster rather than the caster belonging to the world. Against the primal frequency, that principle had no purchase. You cannot take from something that simply is. Quirrell stepped back. It was involuntary. Harry could see that in the way the body moved, the wrong quality of the step, the slight stumble. As if the body itself had retreated from something that the controlling presence could not fully override. The two of them stood in the corridor in the aftermath of that, and the air slowly returned to its normal temperature, and the snow outside kept falling with the complete indifference of weather. "Interesting," said the voice, very quietly. "Go back to your rooms, Professor," Harry said. A long pause. Then, with a quality that Harry would spend a long time turning over afterward, something between acknowledgement and something that might, in a different life, have been called respect, this isn't over, Harry Potter. I know, Harry said. Go back. Quirrell's body turned and walked away down the corridor, and Harry watched it go, and stood alone in the third-floor corridor with the stone breathing softly behind the locked door, and felt the particular quality of someone who has just had their first real confrontation with the thing they've been preparing for and discovered that preparation and reality are different weights even when you've prepared well. He breathed slowly. He let his hands settle. He walked to the locked door and pressed his palm flat against it. The magic in it was extraordinary, layered, complex, each enchantment interacting with the next in ways that were individually elegant and collectively formidable. He could feel Dumbledore in the architecture of it, the particular signature of a genuinely great magical mind, the same quality of careful intelligence he'd felt in the headmaster's office when they'd talked. He could also feel, now that he was this close, that the lock was under strain. Not failing, but bearing weight it had not been designed to bear indefinitely. He stood there for a while, feeling the stone on the other side, learning the shape of everything between here and it. Then he walked back to Gryffindor Tower. He told them that night. All of it, the confrontation in the corridor, the conversation, the quality of what he'd felt in Voldemort's magic, the state of the protections. He sat in the corner of the common room with Ron, Hermione, and Neville around him, and he talked, and they listened with the specific quality of listening that people have when they understand that what's being said matters. When he finished, Hermione said, "He talked to you." "Yes. Voldemort talked to you." "In a school corridor." "For several minutes." "The primal frequency unsettled him," Harry said. I think being that close to what he spent 50 years looking for and couldn't reach does something to his composure." "That's the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard," Hermione said, and she did not mean it critically. "You held him back," Ron said. "Without your wand?" "Yes. Just by being there." "More or less." Ron looked at him steadily. "Harry. I say this with genuine respect. You are the most unusual person I've ever met." "You've met Fred and George," Harry said. "They're unusual in a normal way," Ron said. "You're unusual in a, I don't have a word for the kind of unusual you are." "Unprecedented," Hermione said. "That's the one," Ron agreed. "The protections are holding," Harry said, "bringing them back. But I don't know for how long. Voldemort is going to move before the end of term. He'll know the castle empties over Christmas and that his window is limited. My guess is the next 2 weeks. What do we do?" Neville asked. "We watch. We're ready." He looked at each of them. "When it happens, I go in." "You three, we go with you," Ron said. "Ron, we go with you," Neville said. Equally quiet, equally absolute. Harry looked at Hermione. She shrugged, in the way of someone who made this decision a while ago and is slightly exasperated at being asked to state it explicitly. "Obviously we go with you." He thought about the Warden saying power is loneliest when wielded alone. He thought about it not as a warning this time but as a fact he was actively contradicting, sitting here in this common room with these 3 people who had decided, without ceremony, to stand in the same place he was standing. "All right," he said. "Together." The castle felt it first. Harry woke at 2 in the morning on the 19th of December, 5 days before the Christmas break, and the castle was awake, fully awake, that deep foundational awareness that he'd felt on the lake stirring into something more urgent, the stones carrying a vibration that was not quite alarm but was adjacent to it. He was out of bed before he was fully conscious of having decided to move. He touched Ron's shoulder once. Ron came awake fast, which Harry had never expected but had come to rely on. Neville woke at his name. He slipped out to the landing to wake Hermione, which required knocking softly on the girls' dormitory door and waiting for the sound of footsteps, and Hermione appeared already dressed in the manner of someone who had not been entirely asleep. "Now?" she whispered. "Now," he said. They moved through the castle in the dark, Harry leading, the castle accommodating them in its way, a torch that should have been out staying lit just long enough, a creaking stair that didn't creak, a suit of armor that a ghost was about to walk through choosing a different route. The castle was helping. Harry felt it clearly, the deliberate quality of its assistance, and felt gratitude toward it that was not metaphorical. The third-floor corridor. The locked door was open. Not broken open, not forced. Open the way a door opens when someone who knows a lock's logic has found the precise argument that makes it agree. The door stood ajar, and through it came the sound of, not nothing. Something. The low, complex sound of multiple enchantments existing in the same space, each one a different magical quality. Harry pushed the door open. The space beyond was larger than a standard corridor room had any business being, another spatial dislocation, the same trick as the vault but executed in the Ministry's clean, geometric style rather than Merlin's organic one. He took in the room in one scan, the enormous three-headed dog slumped asleep on the floor, the trapdoor in the center. "He's already through," Harry said. "The dog is, sleeping draft in the music, I'd guess." Hagrid mentioned Fluffy calms down for music. He moved to the trapdoor and opened it and looked down. "We follow." He went first, dropping through, and the others followed, and what came after was a descent through Dumbledore's protective gauntlet, the devil's snare that Hermione identified and lit immediately, confident and fast, the winged keys that Ron navigated with the spatial instinct of a natural Quidditch mind, the chess game that Ron looked at for 30 seconds and said I need to play this and Harry let him because Ron was right. It was the right tool for the right person. Ron played it with the focused intensity of someone for whom chess had always been the clearest language available, his eyes moving across the board with the systematic calm of someone reading a text he's fluent in. He was extraordinary at it. Harry watched him and thought that this was the thing Ron Weasley consistently failed to understand about himself, that his particular intelligence was strategic and spatial and that it was as valuable as any other kind. "Knight to e5, Ron said, and the pieces moved, and the path cleared. "You're brilliant at this," Neville said. "Don't make it weird," Ron said, but he was flushed with something that wasn't embarrassment. The troll in the next room was already unconscious, not their problem, clearly Voldemort's work on the way through. Harry noted it and moved on. The flames, purple and black, 2 corridors, Hermione already pulling a small bottle from her pocket. She'd prepared. Of course she had. She studied the bottles with the focused efficiency of someone solving a logic puzzle, which was precisely what it was, and solved it in under 2 minutes. "There's enough for 2 in the forward bottle," she said. "1 for backward." She looked at Harry. "You go forward. Ron, Neville and I go back." "Hermione, you're the one who needs to go forward," she said. "And we should go back and get help." "Owl Dumbledore." She pressed the bottle into his hand. Her face was steady, and warm, and completely certain. "Go." He held her gaze. "The forward flame won't hurt you if you, I know. I've read the enchantment. Go, Harry." He looked at the 3 of them, Hermione with her chin up, Ron with his shoulders squared, Neville with those steady brown eyes and an expression that had nothing of the anxious boy from the platform boat in it at all. 6 months. 6 months and they were standing in the 7th layer of Dumbledore's defenses at 2 in the morning without hesitation. "Thank you," Harry said. "All 3 of you." "You can thank us later," Ron said. "Go stop the Dark Lord." Harry drank the forward potion and walked through the black flame. The last room was a mirror. It stood alone in the center, floor to ceiling, gold-framed, old, the mirror of Eriste, which Harry knew from the spheres the way he knew most things, its name and its function and the inscription that ran along the top in an anagram that wasn't particularly difficult to decode once you knew what you were decoding. He knew what it showed. He knew its mechanism. Quirrell was standing in front of it with both hands pressed to the frame and the wrong eyes looking into the glass with the intensity of someone trying to force an answer from something that will not be forced. He turned when Harry came through the flame. The pretense was entirely gone now. The stammer, the nervous shuffle, the professor performance, none of it. What stood in front of the mirror was Quirrell's body occupied with the full weight of Voldemort's presence, the cold intelligence fully forward, and the turban beginning to unravel at the back in a way that suggested the containment was straining. "I cannot see it in the glass," Voldemort said, with Quirrell's mouth. "The mirror shows desire. I desire the stone. I should see the stone." "The mirror shows the deepest desire," Harry said, walking closer. "Not cautiously, steadily. Not what you think you want. What you actually want." "I want the stone." "No," Harry said. "You want what the stone represents." He looked at the mirror as he moved toward it. "You want to be whole again. Not powerful, you have power. Whole. What you destroyed when you made the choices you made." He stopped beside the mirror, equidistant between Quirrell and the glass. "The mirror knows the difference. It won't show you the stone because the stone isn't what you really desire." Quirrell's face was strange. The wrong eyes looking at Harry with an expression that was not what Harry had expected. Not rage, not menace. Something that was almost recognition. The same quality as in the corridor. As if, in this room with this mirror, the layers of what Voldemort had made himself into were very thin. "Look in the mirror," the voice said, quietly. "Tell me what you see." Harry turned and looked into the glass. He saw himself. 11 years old, same messy hair, same green eyes behind the glasses. Standing in the vault, under the silver tree. And beside him, the Warden, clearer in the mirror's glass than Harry had ever seen it in reality, fully formed, fully present, and in its hand, nothing. Empty hands. An expression that was, in this clarity, unmistakably warm. He felt, in the same moment, something drop into his pocket. The stone, warm and small and breathing, settling into his pocket with the quality of something that has arrived where it was always going to arrive. He turned back to Voldemort. "What did you see?" the voice said. "Home," Harry said. "Honest." Something broke in Quirrell's expression. Not shattered, broke the way ice breaks in warming weather, a crack forming and widening, the surface suddenly unreliable. "Home," the voice repeated, and in the repetition was something Harry had not expected from Lord Voldemort, grief. Old grief, the kind that has been so thoroughly suppressed it has forgotten it exists until something touches the exact place it lives. "You could have had that," Harry said quietly. "Before. What you were looking for was real. The door would have opened." "I wasn't looking for a door," Voldemort said. "I was looking for a way to make the world open." "I know," Harry said. "That's the error." He held Quirrell's gaze, held the presence behind it, and breathed, and let the primal frequency move outward in the way he'd let it move in the corridor. Warm, steady, sourceless. Not attacking. Just present. Just real, in the specific way that the oldest kind of magic was real, the way living things were real. Quirrell took a step toward him. The wrong eyes were intent. Fixed. And Harry felt, in the quality of Voldemort's attention, the thing he'd been feeling since the corridor but clearer now, the desperate recognition of something that had been looking for what Harry carried and had never found it, and was now standing 3 feet from it and reaching, not with force but with something much more fundamental. The hands that touched Harry's arms were Quirrell's hands and were not. And the contact was like, Harry would spend a long time finding the right description for this. Not pain. Not immediately. It was more like 2 incompatible frequencies meeting at the point of contact, the warm primal resonance and the cold extracted magic, and the result was not a blend but an intensification of both until the point of contact could not contain it. The stone in Harry's pocket grew warm. Quirrell's hand started, and Harry saw this with terrible clarity, began to crack. Not from external force. From internal incompatibility. The primal frequency from Harry, moving through skin contact with the concentrated intensity of close range, meeting the architecture of what Voldemort had made Quirrell's body into, a vessel for extracted magic, its own nature suppressed and redirected for so long that its fundamental structure had become dependent on that suppression, and the primal quality, which was the magic of natural things in their natural state, reacting to the suppression the way sunlight reacts to ice. Quirrell let go. He stumbled. The hands were, wrong-looking, cracked along the surfaces in patterns that were not physical injury but magical dissolution, the body's own magic reasserting violently against the graft. Harry stepped back. "Tom," he said. The wrong eyes focused on him. The use of the name, the real name, not the constructed identity, landed in the room with its own weight. "You know that name," Voldemort said, and the voice was very quiet. "I know your history," Harry said. "I know what you were looking for before you became this. I know the moment you made the choice that cost you everything." He held the gaze of those wrong eyes. "I'm sorry it went this way." "Don't," the voice started, and then stopped, and what happened next happened fast. The graft failed. It failed the way a dam fails when the structural compromise has been going on too long and the final stress is too much, not gradually, not with warning, but all at once, the containment releasing entirely. The darkness that came out of Quirrell was not physical, it was the magical signature, freed from the body, momentarily present in the room as itself before it dissipated. Harry saw it for the 3 seconds it existed as a coherent form, dark, cold, diminished, the 10-year reduction of something that had once been genuinely extraordinary, and felt, in those 3 seconds, the primal frequency around him react to it with the same instinct it had shown in the corridor. Not aggression. Recognition. And, beneath that, something older, the same thing the mirror had shown, the same quality of home, offered to something that had spent 50 years making itself incapable of receiving it. The darkness dissipated. Quirrell collapsed. Harry stood in the room with the mirror of Eriste and the unconscious professor and the silence that comes after something very large has happened, and he breathed slowly, and felt the stone in his pocket, and felt the castle around him, awake and present and humming with the aftermath of something it had been holding its breath about for months. He knelt beside Quirrell, checked him, alive, breathing, the wrong eyes gone, just Quirrell's own eyes behind the lids, unfocused but present, the man's own weak magic reasserting tentatively like a plant growing back through cracks in pavement. Harry stood up. He looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back, just him, plain and ordinary in the extraordinary room, the green eyes behind the glasses that had always been 2 sizes too big. No vault this time. Just him. He reached into his pocket and held the stone up. Warm, smooth, red in the mirror's golden light, breathing its faint primal breath into his palm. He thought about what to do with it, and it took him less time to decide than he'd expected. He put it back in his pocket. He picked up Quirrell, fireman carry across his shoulders the way the Warden had once told him Merlin had carried an injured apprentice across 3 miles of Welsh mountain, and he walked back through the room, back toward the flames, back up through the gauntlet. His friends were waiting.